can be aware of the time that we have together today and really and truly maximize it. I'm going to slow down just a little bit. Okay, so today I want our grounding activity to be rooted in appreciation. And we're gonna look at our appreciation as the roots that have developed a system underground, providing us with nutrients and water. And then we're gonna also ground ourselves in branches, and we're gonna talk about how the fruits of our labor will be present and reflective of generations to come. So I'm gonna intentionally ask everyone to kind of steel yourselves at this point and share with me in these grounding moments. I want us to ground ourselves in the land, in our shared anti poverty purpose, and in the spirit of those who tilled the land prior to our arrival. And I think there may be someone that's not muted. I'll pause for a moment. Okay. So we're grounding ourselves intentionally in the land, in our shared anti poverty purpose, and in the spirit of those who tilled the land prior to our arrival, recognizing that although we represent various nations, states, organizations, and communities, we are united by the opportunities that CSBG offers us to carry our ancestral traditions and legacies forward for the advancement of all people. So, as we ground ourselves, let us collectively breathe together. Let's honor the generations that came before us and the ones who will follow us. As we settle in this space and in a posture of appreciation for the ancestors, let's take our first collective breath in the strength of those who built our nation, and let's breathe out gratitude for them. Let's take our second collective breath for this present moment in which we breathe in our shared commitment to serve and breathe out how you hope to connect and create community even during this gathering. Our closing collective breath is for the future. So we breathe in hope for sovereign and thriving futures and breathe out the determination and perseverance to create change. And I believe that change requires affirmation, assertiveness, and action. So I'm asking you to help me power up and charge up this space with powerful words or phrases that resonate with you, uplift you, and inspire you to continue this work. So you're welcome to type in the chat or unmute and speak aloud words or phrases of power. And I want you all to be intentional about this. Some examples of words that came to my mind when I was thinking about this activity were community, resilience, empowerment, healing. Um, do you all have any power words that you want to bring to our space today? If so, I'm encouraging you to come off mute and share those words and or drop those in the chat. I'm moving so I can see the chat. Thank you, hopeful, welcoming,
Perseverance.
Perseverance, thank you. Empowerment, commitment, compassion, empathy, supportive. Thank you for those. Together, uplifting. See how patient I am? I'm just waiting because I know that brazen, self sustaining. Any other words of power and uplift that we want achieve? Vocal, having a voice and using it. Any others? Inspiration, unwavering. I believe these are all affirmations and service. Very good. Yes. Compassion, community. And I love it when it's written that way. You all can continue to place those words in the chat throughout the meeting. Let me see. Always believe in yourself. I love that. I love that phrase. But I want these words to now be our seeds. And the seeds that are being sown in this meeting are for sovereign futures as suggested. And I do believe that what we plant through CSBG will grow into impact for generations to come. So again, I want to welcome you to day 2. We've powered up. We're in our virtual space for the Tribal Annual Meeting. And I'm going to turn it over to Jordan Dion from Lux Consulting Group, who will further open our meeting today. Jordan?
Thank you, Verna. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to day 2. We are so happy you're able to join us. So yesterday we had laid an important foundation, diving into program requirements, exploring different tools, and talking about stewardship. Today we're building on that momentum and really lean in today's sessions. I would like to encourage each of you to be bold in asking questions, even the ones that may feel small or uncertain, because often those spark the most meaningful discussions. I also encourage you to be curious, allow yourself to explore new ideas, new ways of approaching challenges, and new opportunities to strengthen the work you're doing in your communities. Most importantly, I invite you to share your stories and experiences. Share what you have learned, the successes you have had, the struggles you have faced. These are not just your stories, they are resources for all of us. By opening up, you help others find solutions, avoid pitfalls, and celebrate possibilities they may not have imagined. And let's not forget, we are stronger together. Each person here is not only a participant, but also a resource for somebody else. Think of today as a circle of exchange, knowledge, wisdom, encouragement, and support flowing between all of us. So as we begin, let's carry the spirit of collaboration and openness. Ask, share, reflect, inspire. Let's make today a day where our voices come together and shape a more impactful future for our communities. Thank you for being here, for showing up fully, and for committing to this important work. Let's begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jordan. And you mentioned resources, and we recognize that we had a slight glitch yesterday when we were trying to share our resources. And since we're already just a few minutes ahead of schedule, I'm going to ask Monica, if you don't mind, can you bring up the resources that we'll also scroll during the break? But I really want to make sure that our participants have an opportunity to see what resources are available to them beyond just what we do during our 2 days together, but resources that are standing. So before I bring up Manette, can we bring up those resources? And we can't hear you if you're talking, Monica. We could see the screen, but we couldn't hear you.
Sorry, yeah. I'm just sharing the resources that are available to you as a grant administrator. Let me try this again. And you can see the screen, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so first part is the CSBG homepage, and you'll see to the left is listed everything that you'll find on
Hey,
the
Monica.
homepage. Yes.
It's not showing us the slide that you're on. I think it's only showing us the view before presenter view. So we're stuck on the title screen.
Okay. So even now it's not showing?
Yeah, like we see the presentation, but it's only showing the first slide.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm not sure why
Okay,
it's
there you
not
go.
allowed.
It might be delayed.
Okay, how about now?
Did you move to the second slide?
It's not showing the slide. So it's not showing the slideshow.
Yeah,
it's
but I also
showing-
have it so it's timed. Are you all seeing it now? Is it moving?
It's not
No.
showing the slideshow page. It's showing the PowerPoint deck. So you have to go to share and hit window and then pick the window that shows your
Yeah, that's
PowerPoint show.
yeah, that's what I did. And on my screen it's going through the motion of the PowerPoint. Which is
Yeah, that's
interesting.
not what we're seeing.
Okay.
Well, guess what, Monica, while you work on it, we're now at time for our next session. So I'm going to move forward with the next presentation, and certainly after this one, maybe we'll have the glitch fixed so that we can share those resources with our attendees today. But I would like to welcome my colleagues from Policy Data and Evaluation. In particular, I'm going to bring up Nanette, and she can introduce her team, but she serves as the branch chief for our Policy Data and Evaluation team. I will tell you all just something very quickly about Nanette. Yes, she's much older than I am. That's what we're going to go with. But I actually had the opportunity to interview Manette as she came to the Office of Community Services. And I have to tell you, I knew at that moment she was someone that we needed on this team who had a lot of experience, expertise, and a lot of compassion, especially in the tribal space. So I'm super excited that she is here to share some of her knowledge with you all today. So Manette, thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you, Verna. I'm trying real hard not to laugh as I talk about the HPs, because duh, everybody knows you only 21.
Right.
She started in the network as a tot. But it is such an honor and a privilege to be here. The tribal annual meeting is always one of my favorite. And I'll tell you a little bit why. So a bit about me. So I have been with ACF for, I think I'm coming up on 3 years, but I've been with HHS for a little over 10. So I started my career with the Centers for Disease Control, and then I went to the Indian Health Service, where I spent about 7 years working directly with American Indians and Alaska Natives. And I like to say in kind of my professional introduction that the tribes professionally raised me. I got to cut my teeth and learn so much about what true partnership means through honoring the government to government relationship with working with our tribal partners. So much so that the tribe sent me back to school, law school, and I studied Indigenous peoples law, and it was one of the greatest experiences that I've had. And doing this kind of brings me back to what I miss about working with the Indian Health Service, which is working directly with tribal leaders, tribal administrators that do the work each and every day to improve the lives of their people. So as I introduce myself, one of my staff members, Kayla Lennon, she'll be pulling up the slides for today. But our presentation, just as kind of a precursor, it's part of a two-parter. So we often, in the larger conversation around the community services block grant, we like to speak about going beyond checking the box. And for us, on the data and evaluation side, checking the box means submitting the CSBG annual report. By law, underneath the CSBG Act, each year, funded states, territories, and tribes essentially provide an accounting of what they did and how they transform lives and meet the 3 statutory goals of the Community Services Block Grant, which are to reduce poverty, revitalize low-income communities, and help those with low income become economically self-sufficient. So this presentation is going to focus largely on how we check that box, but how we do it a little bit stronger. And then we're going to move into a part 2 that'll be led by our partners over at Lux Consulting Group, where we'll kind of take what we talked about today and have more of a dialogue. But that is not to say that this is not meant to be a dialogue. I'm hoping that you all would be comfortable throwing things in the chat, coming off mute, and sharing your own experiences, because we're going to walk through a sample version of a CSBG Tribal annual report and talk through what are the ways that we can improve the narratives that we send, because no one can tell the story of Indigenous people better than Indigenous people. So as we click through, Kayla, you can go ahead and hit the next slide for me. And the next one. I'm going to introduce you to the faces of the folks that help with the Tribal Annual Report on my team. I have an incredible team, and I try my best to bring them. They're all on the call, but I try my best to bring them in the spaces and places that I may go into to talk about the story of CSBG, because it's them that do the frontline work, that help with the fillable PDF, or how to put it in OLDC, or how to get access to OLDC, or how to interpret a specific service category or domain and translate that into a broader story. And then we'll move into a guided exercise. So what we did is, inspired by a lot of the submissions that came to us, we built a fictitious example with a fictitious tribe, the Wahota Nation. And as we go through this guided exercise, we're going to talk together about ways that we can strengthen the narrative to really hone in on the story that gets submitted by way of the annual report. In a few minutes, what's going to get dropped in the chat is a copy of this fictitious tribal annual report. But I'm also going to encourage you to pull up the latest copy of the tribal annual report that your tribe or tribal organization submitted into OLDC, because the tribal annual report was due back in March. And as we walk through some of the sections, I'm going to encourage you to kind of take notes, whether it be digital notes or physical Post-its that you use, just to say, okay, well, maybe when we submit it next time, maybe I can do this. Or I really like this idea that this one tribal administrator brought up. I'd like to use that. Then we'll open it up for any questions and close it out, which is essentially really teeing it up for the next session that we'll have, that will carry into, now that we've got it on paper, how do we take the words that we put on paper and turn it into a rich image and story. Next slide. So as a reminder, this is your federal team on the policy, data, and evaluation side. Your program specialists are always your front line, and your program specialists are folks that you know. They're on this call as well. Those are the people that support you with your tribal plan, with the day-to-day administration and the oversight of the grant. When you get into the data collection, the PDE federal team is here to support you. Our team, just like program operations, is structured for regional assignments. So we have Melanie Durley, who is a program evaluator, but the data and evaluation specialist for regions 1, 2, and 3. Then we have Monique Alcantara, our management analyst, and she's the data and evaluation specialist for regions 4, 6, and 7. And then Kayla Lennon, who is running point and supporting me today. She's our community services program specialist, and she has regions 5 and 9. And then Lena Kotanchin, she is our data analyst, and she supports regions 8 and 10. I thank them for the work that they do each and every day to support you all, and we wholeheartedly and together thank you all for the work that you do each and every day to serve our nation's most vulnerable in your communities. Next up, all right, so going in the chat is going to be a link to a PDF example for this guided exercise. Thank you, Kayla. So we're going to go through this fictitious report together, and it uses some scenarios that are inspired by reports that have been submitted in the past. And for this exercise, you're also going to, again, pull up your most recent copy of your tribe or tribal organization's report. We're going to go through the sections alongside the example, and this is intended to be interactive. So I want you to get comfortable, get ready to chime in the chat if you're comfortable typing it in the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute to share that information. Next. So we're going to start with a bit of tribal background. So this tribe that's submitting this report that you see is the Wahota Nation, and their Community Services Block Grant, or CSBG, Tribal Annual Report for fiscal year 2024. Within the tribe's government, the department that administers CSBG is the Wahota Department of Community Strengthening, or DCS, and each year the Wahota Nation receives $750,000. The goal of the Wahota Nation's Department of Community Strengthening, they aim to empower its citizens by reducing poverty, revitalizing communities, and promoting self-sufficiency through culturally grounded services and supports. The primary focus is bringing together cultural revitalization of their people with economic self-sufficiency while maintaining the Wahota way of life. The Wahota DCS focuses on, these are their key focus areas for how they administer CSBG, emergency assistance because their land endures natural disaster, workforce development and job readiness to build cooperative economics, youth mentorship to honor and prepare the next 7 generations, elder support services to respect and honor the previous 7 generations, and transportation assistance to connect the people of Wahota from each corner of the land from north to south. The tribal administrator prepared the fiscal year 2024 CSBG annual report, and today we're going to review it and determine the strengths of the submission and ways to enhance its strength. For the session directly after this, our partners at Lux are going to do an interactive session, and they're going to take the words from the report and translate them into a rich story filled with important data that speaks to the power of tribal communities. So I'm going to leave this on here for like 1 or 2 more seconds. We can hop back one, Kayla, real quick. I'm going to leave this on here just so you can kind of digest a couple of things. Again, the tribe is the Wahota Nation. The tribal department that administers CSBG is DCS. Their allocation is $750,000. And then you see the mission statement of DCS and what their focus areas are. And these should feel somewhat familiar because of the way that the tribal annual report is structured, but all of these points are going to come back up. Next slide. So now we'll walk through the sections. And if you all can just hit me with a thumbs up, just to make sure that that link opened for you and you have the Wahota Nation example of a tribal annual report, that would be wonderful. All right, C2. Thank you, thank you. All right, so first up is the tribal CSBG expenditures. Expenditures are fairly straightforward. So the total that the Wahota Nation is allocated is $750,000. That is going to be a big distinction in the type of report that you submit. So last year, the Office of Community Services embarked on the OMB approval process for all of our reporting forms to update them with the core purpose of reducing the burden on all of our grant recipients. And one of the things that we had examined is when we have tribes that are getting less than $50,000 and they're submitting this report, sometimes the administrative burden of having to put the report together, quite frankly, I like to say the juice was not worth the squeeze. So you're getting only a few $1,000s in expenditures, but expected to fill out the same length of a report as a tribe or tribal organization that's receiving significantly more. So in this example, Wahota Nation would be completing the tribal annual report. If you are with a tribe or tribal organization that receives less than $50,000, you would actually complete the short form. Now, they're almost identical except for one particular part that doesn't apply on the short form version. But that is a key distinction in this example. And we wanted to walk through an example of what the longer version of the form would look like. So with these expenditures that are fairly straightforward, that total allocation is $750,000. Before we jump into the areas where the money is spent or expenditures, let's do A3, which is that gray box at the bottom. Under the CSBG Act, there is an administrative cap of 5% on the total allocation. So we're going to do the math. $750,000 times 0.05, that's $37,500. A tip here would also be to reference what was submitted in your state plan. So here we see the Wahota Nation spent just under 5% of their total administrative cap on their administrative fees. Now, with the administrative piece taken off, now we'll go back up to A2 to look at the domains in which they spent money. The flexibility of the Community Services Block Grant allows for spending to kind of be done across a myriad of domain service categories. Some of the key ones that we know studies show lead to reducing poverty, of course, are employment, childcare, early childhood youth development, and adult education. income and asset building, housing, health and nutrition, civic engagement and community involvement, transportation, and then oftentimes partnerships, linkages, and coordinations. And then there's always the other, because we also know that the work that is done is driven by the community, formally through a community needs assessment process. So there may be a domain or service area that's not captured or correctly captured in any of the previously mentioned ones. Here for the Wahota Nation, they spent $175,000 on employment, $125,000 for childcare, early childhood, youth development, and adult education, $75,000 on housing, $104,000 on health and nutrition, about $85,000 on transportation, and about $150,000 on partnerships, linkages, and coordination. The PDF that you all use does auto calculate, so it's about 714,000 total. Now, a key thing when we're reading this report, what this page tells us is, okay, we see income and asset building is blank, which means the tribe didn't spend any money on income and asset building services. That isn't to say that the tribe probably didn't have an outcome that led to income and asset building. So you may have spent money on employment. And as a result of spending money on employment, somebody earned money or was able to buy a house or buy a car. But when we look at this, what we're looking to see is where are the investments being made so that we can then look at the services that are coming out of these investments, and then longer term, what are the outcomes? Next slide. Now we'll go into the narrative of all these different domains, and this is essentially the work that's being done. One of my favorite elements of the Tribal Annual Report is that it's largely qualitative. So we collect narrative long-form data. These narratives drive a great part of what we collect, peppered with the numbers. If you were here yesterday for the first part of the Tribal Annual Meeting, and Verna opened the floor for anybody to provide any kind of closing reflections, and I shared the example that was shared a couple of years ago about the tribe funding refrigerator repairs or appliance repairs. And that repair led to an elder being able to keep their diabetes medication cold. That is a story that sticks to me until this day, and that story was told a very long time ago. And then a tribal administrator shared about a community baby shower. A favorite thing of mine in working with tribes is the oration and the storytelling. Storytelling is just as much data as is an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of numbers that no one can interpret. I spent a bulk of my time working on tribal consultations when I used to work for the Indian Health Service. And I would always be amazed listening to tribal leaders and tribal officials get up in the middle of a listening session and share their sentiments about how maybe the opioid epidemic is impacting their community, or how suicide clusters are impacting them, and how they use what was happening to partner with other departments or other federal agencies to determine, well, how do we attack this issue head on? And in those conversations and in sharing those stories, you're passing along data. And that is essentially the design by virtue of what we've laid out here for the tribal report. So we're looking for you to tell those stories. As Jordan said earlier when he was opening up the meeting, no contribution is too small. So if you said, okay, well, we took the $200 that we had left and we were able to buy holiday dinner for 4 families. That might seem small in that moment, but that is such a big contribution, because then that turns into 4 families went to bed full instead of hungry. And those are the types of things that we lean on when we're talking about the Tribal Annual Report and those types of stories. So here with the Wahota Nation under Employment Services, our tribe operates a small business incubator using funding from the Department of Labor. The program teaches the citizens of our nation how to build a business. 56 people utilize this incubator program. We also provided job readiness workshops for 73 people, resume clinics for 48 people, and commercial driver's license or CDL training for 36 people. 28 people got their CDL after going to our training program. And then this tribe included a quote. I attended the small business incubator to learn how to build a business. Through the Wahota CSBG, I learned how to scale a small business. I now use an ancestral practice of milling rice that I learned from my grandfather, and I sell wild rice at the farmer's market. Through this incubator, I have been able to employ 2 of my neighbors. Jason from the Wahota Nation. Now, think about what you see written here, what jumps out to you, whether it be the numbers or the quote, or if it's who they partnered with. I kind of want you to rest with that because we're going to go to the next slide. And I'm going to open it up for you all to share what you think. We can hit the next one. So in reading that employment example, what information is the tribe giving us? Is there any information that you believe is missing? Do you believe that this is a thorough enough description of services? And what does the response tell you about the services that they provide? And is there anything that you would change if you were the tribal administrator for the Wahota Nation? I'm gonna pause there and check the chat to see if anybody has anything. And you are also welcome to come off mute. So as you all are chiming in, because I know that there's some good responses, because many of you are sitting in the seat of the person filling out the report, I'm going to point out a few things. So the Wahota Nation leverage their funding from the Department of Labor. That is a big deal in the world of community action. States do it, territories do it, where partnership, that's how you stretch a dollar to really help people. So leveraging their funding from the Department of Labor to create an incubator for their citizens, that's a huge deal and something to highlight. And then in this program, they did continuous workshops, resume clinics for people to be employed by the tribe. And then they did CDL training to support the budding trucking industry in the area. They also included a narrative from a beneficiary. Something to note here is that they included an outcome. And the outcome of the 36 people who did this CDL training, 28 people received their CDL license. That's nearly 78% of the people that they trained now have a CDL license, which means the likelihood of them being able to be employed either as a entrepreneur or with a trucking company, that has now increased. This is an incredible story to tell. This means that about 3 out of the 4 people now have credentials to obtain suitable employment for making a living wage. Does anybody have any reflections on that example that they'd like to share? All right. I'm going to take it up to it's earlier in the day, and some of you are probably trying to perk up and get ready, but there's many more of these, so I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's contribution. Oh, I see some things coming in chat. I like the community building aspect told in the narrative. Thank you. That's a really good example and a good call out, because oftentimes with these narratives, it's more than just putting it on a piece of paper. We take this information and when we are tapped for technical assistance, whether it be from our partners on the legislative side, or or if it's for our congressional reporting that we're required by law to submit each year to show Congress what we're doing with our appropriations, or when we are conducting just general federal business. These narratives are how we bring you all into the rooms where decisions are being made about CSBG and the important work that it does. So when we get those quotes or we hear the outcomes that are coming out of it, whereas a certain amount of people were trained, but because of it, these many people got a license, that's huge. And no, no, they don't. Please, these were inspired by a lot of the submissions in previous years. And part of why we do these types of convenings is also to help, because iron sharpens iron. So our intention is to open up a space where we can talk about it. And thankfully, you have a program specialist and a data and evaluation specialist assigned to you, and they can help you. But our hope and intent is that after today, a lot of this practice work will help you all as you shape these narratives in the future. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so under the child care, early childhood, youth development, and adult education services, Wahota included on there that they expended funds in this area. Here they told us they provided tutoring, a cultural mentorship program for kids, and that many people thought that the program was useful. So we got a 3-sentence We got a 3-sentence entry here for this particular one. And if you recall, they spent $125,000 on this particular service area. So next slide. Now, in that 3-sentence submission for this particular domain of the youth development and education, what information is the tribe giving us and what information is missing? Is there a thorough description of the services provided? What does the response tell you about the services? And is there anything you would change? I'd love to hear from you all and telling me what you would do differently or if there's things that you really like.
Can we hear the 3 sentences or read them again?
Absolutely. So the Wahota Nation, for this particular domain, they provided tutoring. They had a cultural mentorship program for the kids, and many people thought that the programs were useful. Okay, Amber, they did not include any statistics or numbers. Okay, so that one, how do people know? How do they know people found it useful? Was there any survey or questionnaire, number of people? Spot on. So that's a big one. And I do want to amplify something because it might sound a little contradictory. Numbers are great. Numbers is how we're able to quantify, and it's something that we should always do. But I think something that is also incredibly important, having come from the tribal space, stories are just as important. We love if you can put numbers on it, but we also know that sometimes you can't measure it, right? So how do you measure if you did talking circles? You're gonna say, oh, well, 12 people came to the talking circles. Sometimes what matters is through that talking circle, we were able to identify that there was a child that was hungry. And that family needed to be fed. And because of it, we were able to send a meal delivery service to that family's house. Rather than you telling me you had 12 people in talking circle, now this story is now you telling me that because of it, an entire family received enough food for a week. And that makes a difference because now we don't have kids going to school angry because they're hungry, they're not focused because they're hungry, or mom is missing a meal because she's stretching the little bit of food that she has to feed the kids. That's equally as important as telling us the number of people that were served. So I love that response. I'd love more detail. How did the mentorship program work? What was learned in the cultural mentorship? It would have been nice to see how things went as far as the services provided. I heard some stories of members' experience. That is such a good one. Having that firsthand account is also important data. And I would include pictures of provide more descriptions of the tutoring ages and skills that were improved, the outcomes. Having data collected justifies the funding. A quote would be great that shares how useful the program was to someone. Yes, pictures are great. These are incredible recommendations. Thank you guys. These are all great, right? So like a combination of everything that you all said would turn this narrative into something that is incredibly strong, and it really drives home the point. And I want to point out something related to what you all shared. So providing the tutoring to who and how many? Did we ask them whether their grades improved? Someone mentioned a survey, or if anyone passed a specific exam. That is a huge outcome. Cultural mentorship program. That's a pretty big deal when you go back to the mission of Wahota's Department of Community Strengthening. What does the mentorship include? Someone put that in the chat. Are they paired with an elder? Do they learn traditions of the Wahota people? How many people? Somebody put that in there too. Is there an age requirement or limit for the program? That also helps us hone in on the age group that's served. Depending on, if this is like, well, we have smaller children, that's a form of early childhood education. If we have high school children, that could also be job readiness. It makes me think of how we tie it into the practice of the 7 generations within the Wahota people as well, because we're also reading when you establish and you tell us, well, this is our mission. And part of the Wahota way is that we prepare the next 7 and we honor the previous 7. That helps me to make the connection. Okay, well, this is how they're tying it into the rich story of their people. And then as it was called out, is like, how do we know that these programs were useful? It was said that they were useful, but how do we know? Did somebody tell a story? One of the suggestions was to include a quote. Did the attendees take a survey? That was included. And can we share high-level results? One thing that I do want to kind of emphasize as well, we love hearing stories directly from the people that are served, but I'll also make sure that I amplify the importance of honoring the privacy of the people that we serve. So for that example that included the Jason R, while this is fictitious, he didn't include like, oh, my neighbor, Sue Jameson, and she makes $36,000 because I was able to employ her. There is a fine balance in sharing that information, but also making sure that as administrators, when you are submitting this data into a federal system, that we're not identifying people and saying, oh yeah, that 16-year-old kid that was going to be homeless, his name was Aaron Johnson, and we made sure that we got him into housing. We can do it while still giving dignity to the person that we provided the services to and still honoring their privacy under law. So we love the quotes. We love all of the information that gets shared, and we just ask that you do it with discretion when you are sharing those direct results. And if it's a survey, you don't need to identify anyone. It can be high-level data. We provided a survey after the cultural mentorship program. So we did a pre-survey where once they came in, we kind of assessed what they know about the Wahota people. And then once they left, we kind of checked in to see how they improve. You don't need to say, oh, that one boy from up the street, he wasn't paying attention, so he doesn't know anything about the key parts of how to be Wahota, right? But 36% of the people that took this cultural mentorship course are stronger in their faith and in their values of being a member of the Wahota Nation. And then I want to talk about making a connection. So in the employment domain, we also have job training. But there are some instances, as I shared earlier, where you may have an outcome I think we have a hot mic. You may have an outcome that sort of touches on multiple areas. So that CDL training that was paid for out of the education line item, maybe Wahota paid the fee for the CDL exam, but it was because they did a mentorship program and that person said, oh yeah, I've been a truck driver for 20 years and I put my kids through college. And the person goes, oh, wow, okay, well, I want to do it too. And by way of that referral, that person then said, I want to go take the CDL training course. And then I got my CDL license. So I would also kind of think about, when you think about the flexibility of the money, the same thing applies to the data. And that flexibility to build those sovereign futures can be translated into a narrative that speaks to impact. Next slide. All right, so housing. So housing security is a big deal for communities with low income. When people have a safe place to live, eat, and sleep, the quality of life and self-sufficiency improves tremendously. So here, the Wahota Nation and Department of Community Strengthening coordinated the provision of rental assistance during emergency and also supported utility cutoff. So the narrative that they provided, a one-sentence narrative, we provided rental assistance in times of emergency and utility shutoff prevention. And I'm going to sit with that for a couple seconds. Okay. Now, they said they provided rental assistance in times of emergency and utility shutoff prevention. What information did the tribe give us? What information is missing? Is that a thorough enough description of the services? What does the response tell you about the services? All right, and I'm already getting some in here. Okay, very little info. The outcomes and if housing stability was maintained. Oh, that's such a good one, Bonnie. Actually didn't even capture that one in there. Housing stability, right? It's one thing to get somebody into a home, but keeping them in the home is always a huge challenge. So that's a really good call out, Bonnie. Thank you. Anyone notice anything else? Did they utilize LIHEAP, budgeting classes? Need more info to determine the impact? What kind of info, Brenda? How many shutoffs were prevented? These are really good. So I'm going to take it from the top, and I encourage you all to keep typing in the chat with Bonnie's suggestion about how was the housing maintained. In this case, right, they said that they provided rental assistance in times of emergency. If they're in Tornado Valley, was it okay just to evacuate them? So we put them temporarily in housing until it was safe and there was an all clear to return back to their land? Or was their home completely destroyed and the tribe put them up in housing until their house was rebuilt? Or to Bonnie's point about housing stability, did the tribe say, we're going to relocate you to somewhere safer and you're going to be there until we can figure something out? What does that mean, that they stayed there indefinitely? What does that look like? And then also pointing out, when we talk about in times of an emergency, what do we mean? Do we need natural disaster emergency? Was it a domestic violence situation where they needed to do an emergency placement or rehousing? Did you all coordinate with like the local ICWA office because it was like a foster care placement and they needed to be thoughtful about, well, what's happening with where this child is staying? We want to operationalize or kind of unpack, what do we mean when we say emergency? Let me see some others. What did assistance look like? So another thing is, did they partner with the housing assistance program, i.e. housing authorities? So I'm going to tie together that comment from Karen and the one up here related to LIHEAP from Nancy. So a big part, again, as I mentioned in community action, is leveraging. Oftentimes, a couple of dollars that you get from one source is not enough to kind of solve the problem. So what you do is what we say, braid together the money. Maybe you have some money from HUD to help people relocate, but part of the issue is they don't have access to utilities, so you might use some LIHEAP money. But then the CSBG dollar can go further because there's less restrictions and it's more flexible. So use those funding to transport the person to the safe housing that you're going to send them to. That's important for us to know, right? That part of why is because it speaks to how funding is leveraged across community action. And that is one of the like age-old problems with trying to tell the larger story about CSBG. You've seen one CSBG, one way that CSBG is administered. You've seen one way of how it's done. Folks are pulling in resources, whether it be from state resources, tribal resources, federal resources, private, nonprofit dollars. You may work with the United Way. A lot of tribes operate Boys and Girls Clubs on their land. So they're pulling in money from Boys and Girls Club. They're pulling in money from maybe the tribal council. We want to hear about how these stories are pulling in together all these funding sources to move the needle forward on hitting those goals, not only of what CSBG's goals are, but what the Wahota Nation has laid out as their mission and aim to support their people. So a lot of the ones that I'm seeing are ones that I thought of is like, oh, I love this. The who, when, why, what, where, how of the resources are provided. I think that's a really easy way to think about how you fill in these narratives. Who did I help? When did I help them? Why did I help them? What kind of service or help did I provide? Where was the service and how? Thank you for that, Roberta. That's a really easy way to kind of remember a formula. And then related to the utility shutoff and how many people, which I think someone called out, what inferences can we make, right? If you, somebody was about to have their home energy or lights disconnected because it's restored, right? If power was restored with a family that has children, now those kids can do their homework with the lights on. Was it an elderly person who needed to keep medication cool? Now that we know that their refrigerator will continue to run. Is it the wintertime and they live in Minnesota, and winters in Minnesota are winters in Minnesota for those of you that are from that part of the country, but you know that heat matters. Heat and in the summers, cooling matters. So making inferences about, okay, well, because of this family was able to avoid this. Those are also important stories to tell, and no one can tell them better than you all. Next slide. We are near the end. So for the health and nutrition, the Wahota Department of Community Strengthening has some tribally operated clinics and some that are operated by the Indian Health Service. So here, they partnered with the Indian Health Service Clinic to provide tribal home visiting, meal delivery, and wellness checks in order to check on the elder population. So read it again. They partnered with the local IHS clinic to provide tribal home visiting, meal delivery, and wellness check to the elder population. Next slide. So in that, and for those of you that have a tribe that either has completely tribally operated clinics and service units, or you have a mixture of some that are IHS operated and some that are tribally operated. What does this information tell us? What information is missing? Is there a thorough description of services? And what does the response tell you about the services and what would you change? And you are welcome to drop those in the chat. So for the health and nutrition, where they're operating tribal home visiting, meal delivery, and wellness checks for elders. Is there anything, if you were the tribal administrator for the Wahota Nation, that you would add, do different? All right, Nancy, number served. Do they use a home health nurse, health aides, or personal hygiene? Ooh, that's a good one. Kind of giving us examples of the health categories that provide services and the types of wellness services. So personal hygiene. Thank you for that, Nancy. So again, partnerships being a huge deal. And I'm going to ask you guys to keep dropping it in the chat. So including if they're leveraging other federal resources, sometimes the resource isn't always money. It may be a service or a program or a function or activity. Some of them may be within ACF. Is if there's a tribal home visiting program across either IHS or ACF, learning how CSBG supports this is critical. It helps us understand the continuum for care within tribal communities for the meal delivery. I know firsthand that a lot of tribal communities, they use CHRs or community health representatives to deliver services to elders, which could connect with the same principle of the Wahota people, 7 generations within the tribe's mission. Expounding on the number of meal deliveries or the number of people help round out the story. The wellness checks can also provide data. Are the checks including blood pressure checks? And I think Nancy alluded to this with like the personal hygiene example. Are we doing blood pressure checks? Are we doing wellness visits for babies? If so, how many babies, how many mothers, and how many people are getting the blood pressure checks? What happens if you don't partner with the Indian Health Service Clinic? I mean, you could include that in your narrative if all of your healthcare services within your tribe are tribally operated. Let's remove the IHS example. Are you partnering with the local clinic? The community baby shower example was shared earlier. Are you doing breastfeeding support classes? Are you helping mothers with safe sleep? Or teaching them traditional practices like the cradle boxes that are often used in some Indigenous communities? Another one is, what exactly do they use CSBG for funding for in partnership with an IHS clinic? That's also helpful to know. Perhaps the CSBG funding pays for the formula, or it pays for the boxes for safe sleep, but it doesn't, but IHS is the one who provides the clinicians or the CHRs to go into and teach new moms how to do it. Or CSBG pays for the van that the CHR goes on. But IHS and the tribe funds the position of the CHR and the blood pressure cuff. But just giving us a narrative and kind of what these visits look like, or how the home visiting works. The greatest story that it tells us, in addition to connecting it to the mission with the age groups, if it's elders, is that it talks to how care is handled within the tribe. And it also speaks to, if you're starting with the baby with the breastfeeding courses, but then you're also doing the elder visits. That makes me think of the mission statement that includes the 7 generations. Next slide. So transportation. So the Wahota Nation procured a van for the Wahota Wheel, a local transportation van that goes around the reservation to take people to critical appointments. So the Wahota Nation believes in connecting its people from corner to corner of their land, and one way they do it in the modern sense is increasing access to transportation. So they created the Wahota Wheel, which is a van route that goes through the main throughway of the reservation. Next slide. Same questions again. What information did the tribe give us about the Wahota Wheel? Is anything missing? Is there something more that you would like to see when you think about transportation access? Again, they believe in connecting their people from corner to corner of their land. And one way that they do it in the modern sense is increasing access to transportation. They created the Wahota Wheel, which is a van route that goes through the main throughway of the reservation. Anybody have any thoughts? Ooh, Nancy, the number of clients served, handicap van, or a care, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting the last part correctly, care person allowed. So the number of clients served, that's a big deal. When you think of what the service is, the basic way is what's the unit of measurement? If I'm giving a ride to somebody, how do I know that I've given good rides? The number of people that have been in my car, the number of miles that I've driven. What are the number of appointment rides given by Bonnie, and how many members served? Is this a service that is now depended on by these members for health appointments? Oh, that's a good one. So I'm going to highlight the last part of Bonnie's contribution. So it's now depended on by these members for health appointments. So understanding is this the sole and only way that folks are able to get to health appointments, or maybe it's not a health appointment. Maybe it's they have to go register for classes. A student has to register for classes. That would be another kind of important detail to include. If we include quotes, is it okay to include PII from tribal members? So I would say under no circumstances is it ever okay to include PII in a report, quote or not. We want to think about outside of the law and the Privacy Act, we also want to be thoughtful about people's dignity, right? So if the quote is divulging more information than you think is necessary, then remove it. But including, someone's address, if it's a minor, we also want to be thoughtful about that type of information as well. So if you say, 16-year-old Jackson is homeless and ran away from home, we're providing a bit more information. So we want to think about the dignity of the people that we're telling the stories about. Critical equals what? What about getting to the grocery store? That is a really good point, Sarah. When we define critical, what do we mean? And I would constitute going to the grocery store as critical because food access is important. So some thoughts. The Wahota Wheel covers the entire reservation, which is large. How large? Unless it was written at the beginning of the report, we're not sure. Are we talking about a tribe that covers multiple states, millions of square miles, thousands of square miles? How many stops are on the Wahota Wheel? Does the tribe count the number of riders in the stops? There may be health rides, to the point that was brought up about what types of rides are these, and also defining what critical means. Are we talking about health rides, service coordination, or is it community centered? Like there's a beating group that's meeting at the local bingo hall. Those are also important because socialization matters. And when we talk about elder care and aging in place, that's also important as well. Purchase outright, a loan processing costs are disallowed. Okay, thank you for that, Roberta. So a rewrite could be the FY24 Wahota Wheel saw 1,000 riders. 247 of those riders were for wellness services, like to go to the community center for exercise classes. 253 transportation for employment classes, and 435 were bringing youth from the local school to the Boys and Girls Club for mental health first aid training. And 47 were safe rides. In some cases, there are public transportations that are offered after hours to make sure that people get home safely. And I want to emphasize again that in all the domains, the privacy of those that we serve is paramount. So as you're including information, be sure to de-identify things that could violate someone's privacy. You may include quotes from someone with their consent, but redact and remove health information or private information. The concept is to combine the total story, but not hone in on one specific person. All right. Next slide. Now for the quantitative part of the report. And for those of you that receive less than $50,000, this part is not a part that applies in your form. So this is what we call the all characteristics report. And this is as close as we get to sort of identifying those that are served outside of quotes that might be shared. This is the quantitative part of the report, and again, applies only to those receiving more than $50,000. This section is not in the short form, so if you receive more than $50,000, you will see this in your form. Now, I want to take a gander to the top. The total people served in the fiscal year is 1,050. This means that for every portion where you see a dark blue bar, the total shouldn't be bigger than 1,050. However, there's one small condition, but can anybody spot what might be off about this slide? And then it's going to lead me into something. So A is sort of your large grand number or your denominator. And you notice how for sex, male, female, it totals up to 1,050. Military status, it totals up to 1,050. Work status, thank you. Is it Katarina? Thank you. Thank you. Exactly. There's one small condition. This is actually something Kayla and I were talking about, and she pointed out as we were finalizing this slide. So you notice on work status, it says individuals 18 plus. Perhaps 300 and something, or a little bit over 300 and something people, they were under 18. And that's why you didn't count them. Those, and you wouldn't put them in unknown or not reported because the qualifier for this section is you're only collecting working data for individuals that are 18 plus. Whereas like for military status, you probably would include the children because children don't serve in the military. But what would be important here is including that information in your submission, right? So if you were to get a note back, oh, well, 3I, your total for work status is less than the total number served. Well, logically, it's because the extra 347, if my math is correct, folks that aren't included, those are children. So we do not count them in the work status because children aren't counted here for work status. But again, the biggest thing is that we look at that total number served, and that allows us to say, in fiscal year 2024, the Wahota Nation served 1,050 of its citizens. And perhaps in the state plan, when they include the background about the tribe, they tell us their total population. We can pull the information and say, based on the population of the Wahota people, they serve 10% of their population with CSBG funds. Or you could say 1 in 10 Wahota Nation citizens were served with CSBG funding. And we make those inferences with the data that you all provide, and it allows us to tell that story. Okay, so next slide, please. Some summary notes for you all based on this exercise is connect the narrative to the mission of the tribe and or the department. When we talk about sovereign futures, we talk about honoring the government to government relationship. The mission and the aim of the tribe, which is oftentimes rooted in their traditions, that's an important bit of information to connect it to. So whether your tribe is, the 7 generations is core to who we are, or water is life is core to who we are. Therefore, we invest our funding into this specific area. It allows us to kind of build out the story to understand the sovereign that's using this funding to serve its people to meet a specific aim or mission. Quantify the impact with who was served. And when we say quantify, using those numbers, but I cannot stress enough, don't hang up so much on the numbers that you lose the core part of the story of your people. So again, using that talking circle example, if 12 people were in the talking circle, but through that circle, you were able to feed 4 families, that's also just as important as giving us the number 12. Include the outcomes of how people were told. So in this example, the quantify, maybe talking circles are a key piece to how you stay connected as a people for the first bullet. And then you quantify, we had 12 people attend the talking circle. The outcome is that through that talking circle, we learned that there were a couple of families where they were going to bed hungry, and we connected them to the Department of Community Strengthening to get meal delivery. Avoid over-personalizing details to honor the privacy. We're not going to say, oh, Jackson, who lives on the south side of the reservation, he ran away from home because he was hungry and he stole food at the, we don't want to include that. We want to know what the outcome is and be thoughtful about what we're including. And then if it applies, because again, not everybody needs to give us that all characteristics data, confirm the numbers add up, and then make sure that your spending is compliant with the law. And that bit is namely that administrative cap. And when we talk about the day-to-day oversight and grant administration, that's sort of out of the PDE wheelhouse, and we look to our partners over in program operations. So next slide. And as I go through this, I'm going to ask you to drop any final reflections, any things that you have found to help you as a tribal administrator that you would be welcome to share with your fellow tribal administrators, tips, hacks, things that make life go a little bit faster for you or a little bit easier as you're compiling all this information across the different departments that you all help to oversee that receive funding with CSBG. You can go ahead and drop that in the chat so that folks can read it, and I'll also share it out loud. But next up is Beyond Data, telling your story with impact with the Lux Consulting Group to transform the story of your tribe or tribal organization, or you could use the Wahota Nation example in an impactful way. We're asking attendees to bring their most recent CSBG annual report, or if you prefer, you could use the Wahota Nation example. And then I also want to give a nice, and it is a very shameless plug. We are preparing for the fiscal year 25 CSBG annual report, but we are doing the fiscal year 26 CSBG annual report training series in the fall. And we will be providing dates and information for the tribal specific sessions, but we also encourage you to join any of the sessions. Iron sharpens iron and our destinies are tied, and we'd love to invite our tribal partners into spaces with also the states and territories to hear how some of those administrators are thinking through the development of their reports and what are ways that they can include those stories. So if you have any final reflections, please provide them in the chat. It has been a privilege to join this space with you all and talk about data, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. And I thank you all so much for your leadership and for dedicating your time and talents to helping your people. And we hope to see and talk to you on email and in the next session. And I'm going to read some of these off. So Roberta, thank you. An opportunity to expand on narratives. Monthly reporting to capture data is helpful. Oh, that is such a good one. It's one of those things where like you have a deadline and you wait until right before the deadline to submit. This is like incremental and it makes it less laborious on the back end. So I really like that suggestion. If anyone has like a template, we see some of our states do this. If you have a template that you created, you're like, you know what? I've created this little standard sheet that I email to all of my departments and say, at the end of the month, turn this in. And then as the administrator, you kind of roll it up into the report. Please feel free to share it with your program specialist so that they can share that across as a resource. The key for a successful report is to start organizing early. Yes, Brenda, I think similar to Roberta's sentiment too, right? Like if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready, as they would say. But I think those are really good nuggets kind of to make it less intense and intimidating. Start early. Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate it. And I will turn it back over to Verna.
Thank you, Manette. I want us to do what we always do, which is show appreciation to our presenters. Can you all join me in showing Manette some virtual appreciation, as well as Kayla for the session that they just presented to us about data, which was so very engaging and inspiring. And there were lots of nuggets that were dropped that were very helpful as we look at how we prepare annual reports going forward. So thank you so much for that, Manette and Kayla. And I'm doing a quick time check based on our agenda. I think we're supposed to have a break at 2:20. I'm going to see as we are about to go to break, Monica, if we are ready with the resource slides.
I'm going to try from a new angle, Verna, and hopefully it'll work.
Great, thank you. So welcome back, everyone. It is 2:25, and we want to start grounding ourselves back in our spaces so that we can stay on schedule for today. If you are back, I know many people are not on camera today, but if you are back, can you at least do some virtual thumbs up or some hand claps or some hearts or something to let me know that you are there? Okay, I'm seeing them slowly come in. All right. Okay. We're just checking. I wanted to do a virtual attendance check And I'm glad you all are showing up. That means that you are still connected and we're providing some information that hopefully is a great use of your time today. So thank you all for coming back on time. I'm making a note on my sheet to give you all extra stars at the end of today for being on time returning from break. So we had a wonderful session this morning, or the early part of the afternoon. It feels like it's still early in the day to me, but about data, and about some of the requirements for how we report CSBG data. Now we're going to go beyond just the data and how we can actually use that data to tell a story, and a story that has great impact. So to lead us through this next session, I'm going to ask Dr. Jamie Muskoff if she will come back and lead us through our next training this afternoon. Jamie?
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to present to you today, hopefully with less technical errors. Hopefully you can hear me. Just thumbs up or yay, I can hear you. That would be helpful.
We
Great
can hear
news.
you. You are coming
Awesome.
through clearly as if you've been a part of a celebration yesterday.
It's like I've been part of a celebration. I have, for me and Roberta. So I'm happy to be her birthday twin as well. Um, but thanks. Welcome back. Hopefully you had a nice break. And I just want to preface this by saying I'm looking at 3 different screens today to give one computer a little bit of a break so that we hopefully don't have the same issues that we had yesterday. So if it looks like I'm not looking at you, it's probably because I am navigating a lot of different spaces that I'm not used to doing, which is fine because it's always exciting for me to learn how to do new things, and hopefully you're the same. I know it can be intimidating to kind of start talking more about things that are not necessarily in our wheelhouse or things that we haven't done yet. But I think that's really what's exciting about learning and having the learning opportunity that we do in the annual meetings. There's such good information, and you all just got excellent information from Annette, about what your annual report looks like to them. And don't you think that that's an interesting thing to note? Because I think that's really going to be sort of a theme that I weave throughout all the things I talk about, which is, when we get to talking about data sovereignty, a huge part of that is making sure that you have control over the narrative about your data. Because I'm sure most of you watch the news, right? And you're probably aware that when you watch the news, they like to throw out little data points here and there, maps and graphs and things. And all of them are interesting data, but data can be used to tell lots of different stories, the same data. So I think that it's really important when we start talking about, telling your story, and still telling stories about the data that you submit, whether it's for CSBG or anything else, that you recognize that by doing so, by giving more context, by really understanding how to take the data and information that you have and turn it into something that's not only useful, but compelling and meaningful to you, and your community, that is a huge part of data sovereignty and the data sovereignty movement, right? It's taking control of the narrative. So for those of you who are new today and weren't here yesterday, I am Jamie Muskoff, as Verna mentioned, and I am a part of the CSBG Tribal Training and Technical Assistance team. I'm also the Vice President of Technical Assistance and Knowledge Management at Lux Consulting Group. And I've been teaching graduate students in a program that I actually graduated from as well, for the last 5 years, specifically talking about information and knowledge strategy. And that has a huge impact on how I'm going to teach this information today. So before we even begin, and I flipped that first slide, one of the things I want to make sure that you have is, that if you don't have your annual report in front of you, something in your mind about, a piece of data or a piece of information that you might have that you think is really important to tell a story about, that maybe you haven't told a full story about yet. The report is really, really helpful, though, obviously, because you've already done some of this work, and it's really helpful as we talk through it. So, but what I'll say is, I think that the beautiful thing about storytelling and talking about data storytelling in this room in particular is that most of us come from communities where storytelling has always been part of the fabric of our lives. Where I come from, before our language was written, our traditions and our histories could only be passed down through oral traditions like storytelling and song, with dance and drums, and through petroglyphs. So to make our histories memorable, our storytelling needed to be compelling, and our storytellers needed to be committed to keeping the truth and the wisdom of others generation after generation. So these ideas about data storytelling we're going to talk about today may seem familiar or like common sense, but as a person who's worked with many different groups of people across every industry, I can tell you this is not always the case. Not everyone in our communities is trusted to tell and keep stories. But as grant administrators, you really are. And we see and honor that role as we talk through these things with you. So remember that data tells us what happened, but stories tell us why it matters. All right. So speaking of why stories matter, in program and administration, we often focus heavily on those numbers, right? Participation rates, budgets, and service metrics. And Minette definitely talked about that and how people were using numbers. And she made sure to mention that, yes, numbers are important, but the true context of those numbers, like why that all matters, really comes from how much you share about those numbers and how they've impacted you. And so turning those numbers into meaningful stories, those stories are what's going to reveal the people and the lives and the communities behind the data. And this is why data storytelling is an essential skill for your work as tribal program leaders. All right, so first of all, I guess as we begin this, one thing I'd like to ask you to do, and you can do this with yourself, or if you're with others today, think about the last time you shared a success story of any kind, or someone else shared a success story with you. And I'd like you to think about what that story was and what made it memorable. And if you have something to write with, I actually think it would be good to have something to write things down on, because as we talk through each of these components, it might be helpful for you to look back on your notes and start putting all of the things that we talk about in context. So think about the last time you shared a success story, or someone shared a success story of some kind with you. What made it memorable? And if there's anybody who wants to share some of that in the chat or come off the mic, and it really could be like, I'm talking about a success story like when my child started a new program at school. He's a freshman in high school, and he just started a brand new program that they've never had before their high school, and he's immediately coming home telling me how he wants to go into agriculture and farming now. And this is my child who loves video games and anime, so to have him tell me that he loves agriculture is great. So to me, like, even though that's not necessarily a success story in the traditional sense, it's a story that I'm carrying with me for forever right now, because it was something that was unexpected. And it was his enthusiasm and just kind of that unexpectedness of what that story told me about what his interests are now that made it memorable. So is there anyone that has a memorable story that they might want to share? You don't have to share all the details if you don't want to, but I'm more interested in you talking about what made it memorable, what makes a story memorable to you. Anybody? I might call on my team members to ask you, because you hear stories from our grant administrators. What are some stories, or what is a story that you might have heard them, and what made it memorable from maybe the last time you spoke with someone?
I think it touches your heart, when someone does something, when we do things in our organizations and it's heartfelt, right? And we change someone's life, whether it's, like she talked about the medicine, or when we have programs where we hear our elders, especially those who paved the way for us, say, hey, without having access to water, healthy, clean water, I wouldn't be here today. Those are the kinds of, when we're able to really change people's lives, that's when that's what makes us remember, right? That's why we're here. That those are the moments that we wait for, that we have that kind of profound impact, when just having access to clean water, or being able to be put on dialysis at home because you have access to clean, healthy water. That may seem small to some, because it's easy for some of us to have access to good water, but for someone who doesn't, and that changes their life, it can be, those are the kinds of stories that we're happy about, right? When those happen. So
Yeah.
absolutely. When we're impacting lives, changing lives. Right.
Yeah. And you started it off perfectly when you said, when something touches your heart, right? When you hear a story, even if it's not a story of success, when you hear a story that is really touching your heart and moving you and connecting with you in some way, because it feels familiar to you, or you are
right.
rooting for someone, of course you connect with that. And that's the thing that you hold on to. And, yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love these stories that y'all are sharing in the chat as well. The family that you helped be able to avoid eviction, right? The fact that you were able to provide new shoes to a child who was starting school, Nancy, right? Never had new shoes before. And I love this, Amanda, when a person says thank you and cries during your meeting, and tells you that if you didn't help, they wouldn't have the food to eat or heat. Those things are really powerful, and they move you to something, right? That's the thing that's important here, is when you're telling a data story, especially in the context of CSBG, right? It's not about, and I want to be really clear on this, right? It's not about just trying to pull on heartstrings and, because we are not communities to feel sorry for. We are communities to celebrate, because we are empowered to do all of these things and help each other and lift each other up, right? That's not a sad story. That's an uplifting, empowering story to share, right? And that's why a program like this is so powerful. That's why the work that you do is so powerful, is because it's about, moving people forward and up. And, like I loved when Monica talked about, we don't give handouts, we give hand-ups, right? That's exactly what we're talking about here. Those are the stories that really resonate with us, but they're the important stories to tell when we're talking about what impacts do these CSBG dollars make in your community, right? Like we want to remember that. And I love that some of you were very vulnerable and honest, as Minette was going through the report, and the first example she gave, someone said, oh, this puts our reporting to shame. Absolutely normal, right? Because y'all don't have a whole lot of time to tell these stories when you're putting together reports. You're putting together a lot of different reports and a lot of different documents. But I hope that, by remembering, remembering that really important point, that when you tell a story, one, you're taking control of your own narrative, and two, you're really having an opportunity to make an impact and have those numbers reconnect to humanity and human beings. I think that that's really where the power is in, when we tell you to, put things in a report. It's not just about getting those numbers in. It's really about showing like what can we do and what have we done. And I love that. Keep putting all that stuff in the chat, because I think that's so important. All right. So let's set the stage here a little bit. So as we, can you hear me? Can you thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yes, we can still
Okay,
hear
great.
you, Jamie.
Woo. It's okay. I have another computer and I could just go over there. All right. The funds that we get through CSBG really help impact real people and families. you've listed a whole bunch of really powerful stories already in the chat, and that's just you speaking off the top of your head, right? Well, our role is to go beyond the metrics and uncover those stories that you are just putting there in the chat. We want to see who and what's behind the numbers and learn what they really tell us about the communities that you're serving. So let's see. If you look at this, if you look at the numbers versus the stories, numbers are things like program participation rates, right? Great. We can tell you that, a certain number of people participated, but the story behind that might be, what did it take for them to get there? What did it take to get their participation in the first place, right? If there's a program that you're offering and people are living in disparate parts of your community, where they're geographically isolated from other people, it may have taken a lot for them to come in physically or for you to go out to them physically to help, right? And to offer support. That's the story beyond a number of, I helped these people. Great. But, the story behind it really is, there were some hardships there. And we reduced the hardship for people because we were able to go out there and provide services. Things like that. Budget allocations, right? We saw a lot of that in the numbers that Minette showed. You have a certain amount of money that you can spend, you allocate them to certain categories, right? That's really important. But then, from the storytelling side, how did allocating that money to one category of services transform your community? And I think it was important to note that sometimes when you allocate money in a certain category, the impacts, like Minette said, are in a different category, right? That's okay, right? You may have spent money on one type of program, but the impacts helped in other areas, right? So, what are those and what were the transformations that took place? Service metrics, another thing, how many were served, when, there's other things that might be associated with just telling us the metrics, right? And that is related to, all of this is really related to preserving your own knowledge. Because as you're telling these stories in these reports, they're not just for the federal team, they're for you, right? And I hope that more than anything else, they're for you, because they really help tell the story of your community and what you all are going through now, what you've been through, what you've overcome, what you've innovated on, and these are the stories to tell inside of our communities to our future generations. And the demographics served, right? We also collect that information in the report, how many veterans, how many men, how many women, et cetera, right? But what is the impact that that's having on generations? If you talk about, I come from a military family, when we talk about, the number of veterans served in places, what does that really mean to that generation of folks who may have served in different wars or, have been alive in different times? How has that impacted their generation if we're able to provide services to them? That's a powerful story to tell as well. So I think it's just seeing how, numbers versus stories, like what's the difference and how do we relate to them, can be really helpful. So let's think about now, think about a number, okay? Because we saw a lot of those, right? And if you say, in your mind, and you can look at through one of your reports, if you think of a response that you had, maybe just go through, and maybe you just had a number of, how many people came through and were served on a particular day using particular funds or in a particular program. If you have that written in your report, let's take a minute to think about what else you might be behind that number that you haven't captured there. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that and look through your report and look for a number that maybe you didn't provide a whole lot of context about. But now that you're looking back at it and you're thinking about it in the context of telling the story, what might have been a different story you told about that number? You can also go back, if you don't have your report, you go back to the report that Minette shared, the sample report, because there are definitely a lot of numbers in there that were great. but maybe lacked a little bit of the story. Anybody? Thank you for resharing the report.
While they're doing that, I want to add that I
Yeah.
find that this is Tammy, by the way, from Lumbee.
Hi, Tammy.
I want to add that I find doing initiatives works best for us because our money is so small, and that when we work on initiatives, rather it be a healthy eating, healthy lifestyle initiative where we target our boys and girls clubs or our elderly housing sites, or if we do an initiative around our garden where we're teaching how to garden, like department doing training and development, where we can say, all right, and now this is helping me to think about that, your conversation, that while we're talking about the garden and healthy eating, we're incorporating learning how agriculture, bringing that back into our community, because that's almost like a lost and dying art. Teaching young people how to farm, how to can, preserve, put away foods for a time, such as when we had COVID and we were desperate for food and couldn't get to a grocery store. So it's become critical that we do that. But at the same time, we're when I think back about how I could have reported on that, it could have looked very different. That we could have incorporated the, taking food to our elderly sites. Those numbers could have been captured, not just the actual work that was going on the farm, but incorporating how we incorporated the youth into that our tribal elders who would deliver the food to. There were so many subgroups that were participating or become part of that initiative. It wasn't just about learning how to provide food or a can or actually farming, working in our community garden. It became so much bigger than that. So I can see that we could have explained that a lot more in retrospect, that we ended up helping our elders in our housing site. We ended up helping our youth to understand the importance of the food, that we were doing Department of like it was almost like workforce development in a way. So there was a lot of different things going on in a health, but the target was healthy lifestyles, healthy living. But it ended up being, it encompassed so many different parts of that report now that I think about it. That's just my 2 cents.
That's like $10 right there. I was amazing.
Thank you. I'll take that.
You shared so many good things there. I love the idea of putting things, because when you say it's an initiative from a knowledge sharing standpoint, that's a context, right?
Yeah.
So you're putting it in a container that's very specific, and automatically it makes it easier to talk about and focus, right? Because I think a lot of times you could talk about a lot of different aspects of it and like what's important, right? But having it in that initiative context can really already set you up of like, this is the important part. We're talking about the health. we're talking about
right. So what I'm thinking is I didn't capture all the numbers. Right.
Sure. Okay.
I thought I did because I was so narrow, but when in thinking about it, it was really much larger. We do initiatives because our tribe is large and our funding's small. When we find ways, you heard me say it was our housing program. So we take our CSBG dollars and try to leverage them with the Boys and Girls Club, with the housing program, with HHS, with any other, other HHS programs, so that it can go so much farther and have such a bigger impact in our community.
Ooh, I love that, Tammy. That was so good. You're getting applause.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
That was really good.
Miss Renee's been great to work with us here.
I love that. Yeah, such a great example, right? Of, things. And I want to emphasize, because I see, Amanda made a comment about like, it takes a lot of courage to ask for help and some are embarrassed, and I think that was in reference to people that you're supporting, but I think that also applies to us, right? Right? when we are trying to figure this out. So, the one thing I want to continue to emphasize is don't be hard on yourself as we're going through this. If you're thinking, gosh, I could have said this or I could have done this differently, that's okay. We all come from different places and we have different things put upon us and perspectives we need to catch, and you're not going to get it all right, but just having spending the time, just a little bit of time to really help yourself kind of think through what the importance of this might be and what this is going to mean to the community if I tell the story about this in a way that matters to us. I think that that's a pause that can really help you as you're putting these things together. And at the same time, I think it's not something that you have to wait. I think somebody mentioned that you don't have to wait till the end until it's time to do the report. As you're going through it, it might be worthwhile to just have part of your process be, okay, like we just had this event, what do we want to say about it really quick? And it might be just, you might have a meeting and you and you just kind of data dump all the things that in your mind of things that happen, and you capture it somehow in writing, or you record it however you want. And then you can come back to it and use the tools we kind of talked about yesterday to help summarize those things, to get those pieces of information distilled and into your reports. So I mean, I think it's a muscle that we have to exercise sometimes, and practice at to get better at it. So that was such a great story, Tammy. Thanks. All right. So this is where I'm going to completely nerd out on you. So don't mind me. This is my jam right here, but I think you'll understand why I want to tell you about this way. So in my field, the data information knowledge wisdom pyramid is something that's pretty old school. Like, most people who do what I do for a living, this is a thing that we've always looked at, but there's a reason for it. It's because it helps really break down these concepts about, what is data versus what is wisdom, and to me, and many of you have said that the wisdom is in the stories, right? So what is it that takes something from data into wisdom? So, this is a good way to frame this. I'd love for you to be able to keep this in mind. So we start at the bottom of this pyramid, right? We've got a lot of raw facts and numbers, 127 families served in the third quarter. Great. Okay. But if we take that those raw numbers and we put it into a context, that is when it becomes information that's pretty useful and handy, right? 127 families received emergency food assistance, representing a 23% increase from the last quarter. That's a lot more context, and it's a lot richer than me just saying, hey, we served 127 families, because now I know that we didn't just serve families. I know how we served the families. We gave them emergency food assistance, and not only that, but that serving that 127 families is actually more than what we did last year. Huge. It tells me that we were able to take the funds that we had and serve more people, right? So that's information. That's really good information. But next, as we write about these things and capture about it, we start converting that information into knowledge. And that means taking information and combining with it with experience. So, in the example, the 23% increase in food assistance relates to seasonal employment patterns, and it reflects our community's resilient strategies during economic uncertainty. That's a whole lot more information, right? And it's information to go back to Minette's point. When they take this information that you put in these reports and, move them on to Congress, they definitely do their best to tell the right story for you, right? And about you. But there's no way that we or anybody else is going to be able to put that experience with the information that you provide, right? So knowing that increase in food assistance was related to seasonal employment patterns, okay, why that's helpful is because it might inform those who provide funding that, hey, there's a certain timing to these funds. There's a certain need at certain times of the year, for example. And these funds, in order for them to be used, in this way, they're part of a larger community set of strategies. And let's get curious about what those strategies are, right? And that might be baked into a plan. That might be put into best practices that are shared with your peers, right? So having that extra knowledge, that extra experience to be added to that information makes a difference. And then the last part of the pyramid is wisdom, right? So it's knowledge applied with judgment and community understanding. So understanding these patterns, right? This relationship between food assistance increases and seasonal employment patterns is going to help us prepare appropriate support systems that honor our community's values while addressing practical needs, right? That's a pretty wise statement there. It's a lot of distillation of all of the things that have come up. And that all came out of that 127 families served in Q3, right? So you know how, and you can see very clearly in this what a different story that data tells versus the story that the knowledge or the wisdom tells, right? So this is how I'd like you to think about the information that you provide in your reporting. Is I could stick with data, but I could really, for our sake in our community and for the purposes of reporting on these funds and really getting in building an understanding across the board on what these funds actually are used for and how they impact lives, that takes a little bit more effort, but really that effort is all about your understanding and your experience that only you have. So again, like I can't stress enough how important it is for you to be able to add those details, because that is really a part of that data sovereignty. Anybody have any questions about this? I know I just kind of nerded out on you a little bit here, but all right. Feel free to come off mute or chat anytime. I love that. Okay, so I know we're gonna keep going over this again and again. You're probably like, okay, I understand now, storytelling matters, but I'm just going to keep talking about it from different perspectives because, we all take on information in different ways. So sometimes I think seeing it in a pyramid and really understanding the different levels of how we present information, and being able to see that we do that all the time, right? That helps because, sometimes I don't really realize that I'm only giving a little bit of the story when I'm talking to friends, or they're only giving me a little bit of the story when they're talking to me, right? The same applies here. Let's see how other ways that we all think about this. So, all right. Yes, we're definitely going to share the slides. Okay, so why does data storytelling matter? Again, it just makes the impact real. And you saw from that pyramid, 100, it's lovely to see 127, the number. That sounds like a lot, and that's great. But, it makes the impact of everything that's happening here real. All of the work that you're putting in, all the work that the program staff's putting in, all of the funding that Congress is approving for these things, like putting all that in context makes the impact of those things very real, because we're part of this very large ecosystem of funding, right? And to know more about how and why those funds are used really matters. Also, the more we're able to tell stories, especially in our own communities, about what we're doing. Yesterday, y'all talked about, the characteristics of, the things that you have to be in order to be an excellent grant administrator. A lot of it has to do with, your heart, and you bringing your heart, and you being a person people can trust in the community, and you being a person who is the keeper of these stories, right? So when you tell a story, what you say matters. And if you can tell the story in a way that's authentic and also really shows, what's mattering in your community and, what's being impactful in your community, I think that builds a whole lot of trust, with the people that you're working with. So, being able to say, oh yeah, from CSBG, I think it was in the annual report webinar. I know I was really moved when Nancy Carnley, you had mentioned about how you were using CSBG funds for school supplies. I think. And, to be able to tell that story, and then I eventually ended up seeing like the photos that you shared from sharing those school supplies or giving out those school supplies. Wow, that matters. And if I was a member of your community and I saw that, I would be like, wow, okay, like this is really helping a lot of people, right? So the same applies, whether it's in your community or outside of your community. As you're telling these stories, it kind of builds trust that, oh, I can see what's going on. I can see that everybody's having an impact, and I can see who's being served, and that person looks like me, or that person's my neighbor, or whatever it might be. But that really helps build trust in people, and it definitely strengthens advocacy, right? So I hate to think about things in evidence terms, right? I think there's a lot that we all push up against when we say evidence. It sounds very clinical or scientific, but it's being able to show in a story that you've had an impact and you've done something in a person's life. Look at all the things that you described there. So matters, and it strengthens your ability to advocate for things that are needed in your community. It strengthens this program's ability to advocate for things that you need in your community, right? And all of that can be done so much better, and in a lot stronger capacity when you are telling more, richer stories. And then finally, of course, yeah, it secures funding, right? They all get funding in a lot of different ways. We all do. And there are people that are responsible for issuing that funding at lots of different levels, locally and federally. So being able to tell the story that, yeah, this worked, being able to touch somebody's heart with a story about how what they've been able to help provide has made a real impact in your community, that helps secure funding in major ways. I'm on a board of directors for a nonprofit, and we've done a really good job of being able to tell the stories in that organization about how the funding that we receive from a federal organization really impacts the lives of lots and lots of people in the area where we serve. So just remember that. All right. Okay. So to make this storytelling a little bit easier, we're just going to talk about these 4 pillars, because I think that's helpful when you're looking at trying to put together your story, which we'll work on in just a second here. I'd like you to think about it and maybe write these things down. This is really going to be, heads up your activity, after this here is, to identify these four pillars for you. So first, audience, right? Who are you talking to? And you can tell different stories. We all do. We tell different stories depending on who the audience is that you're speaking to. So when you're writing things in a report for CSBG, your audience is the federal staff who's receiving the report, who's then going to take that information and take it elsewhere to really the funding source, right? But that same story could be told potentially in a different way to a different audience. Not saying that you forget details and things like that, but different things are meaningful to different groups of people, right? I'm not going to tell the same story to my child that I'm going to tell to my husband about the same event. Same thing, or my best friend or my husband, same thing. I'm not going to tell them exactly the same story in the same way. But I am going to try to tell them a story that's most appropriate for them, because I know how each of them needs to hear it, and what matters to them. So consider your audience right away. The second thing is, what's your message? What's the most important thing that you want that audience member or that whole group of audience members to take away from the story that you're trying to tell, right? Every story that you tell, particularly in this context of grants, it should have a purpose. It should really be there to be a reminder to people that, hey, the community is doing all these great things and needs your support, or there's certain members of our community that need something and they need your support. I like sometimes when I teach this, it's kind of thinking about the ask a lot of times, right? Like if you're telling the story, what do you hope will come of that? Like, what actions do you think people will take when they hear your message? That's really what we're talking about when you say, like, what is the single most important takeaway? And in some cases, it might not be an action, but I honestly think a lot of times, the takeaway is some kind of call to action of some sort. And then the third pillar is visuals. We already talked about this, right? Photos make a huge difference. Seeing things can make a huge difference, especially if someone is a more visual learner. So a lot of times you have to kind of think about, how are people seeing this, and what is it that they see that will matter is, like for me, I love seeing photos. My husband is an engineer. He wants to see charts. Okay. And so you have to think about, going back to your audience, what would your audience specifically want to see? What's going to resonate? And a lot of times it's a marriage of both things, right? It's being able to see things in a chart or some kind of, illustration, but it's also, being able to see things in numbers that, that make sense in a visual, on people's faces. It's always good to sort of cover all of those people if your audience is pretty broad. Then the last thing is the medium, choosing the right format. I think that people, like I said, learn in lots of different ways. We know that our medium for turning in, our information about CSBG is an annual report, but you don't have to just contain that information that you have about what happened with your CSBG funds into that annual report. You can put something together for yourselves about, kind of like the scrapbook of what happened. What did we do this year? Because I guarantee you that when you look back on all the things that you have touched and you have had happen and made happen in the community, through your work, you have something to really be proud of. And, even if you were just to keep that for yourself and inside your organization, that's worth keeping, right? That's the kind of thing that we want to pass on in our community for generations, is like, look at all the things that we were able to accomplish together. So, what's the right medium for that? Is it like I said, is it a scrapbook? Is it a report? Is it an infographic? Is it a video or an audio or a social media post? Again, going back to who your audience is, match the medium with your audience. So if you would entertain this idea as an activity, I would like you to, take some time. Like, if you were going to take one part of your report, one area that you might have reported on, for CSBG, I would love for you to take that and walk through these 4 pillars and very, quickly as you can, write down, okay, if we're talking about things that we like, Tammy, we're talking about housing programs, right? If I were to tell a story of all the things that happened, what, who's my audience? Which audiences might I want to write to or tell the story to? And then the second thing you want to write down is, what message? What's the most important thing a person needs to know after I tell them this story? The third thing is your visuals. Like, do you need visuals here? Would the audience that you are going to tell this data story to, or would they rather see pictures of, the people in your community receiving services, going in the garden, cooking, starting school, whatever it is? Who are they going to love that more? Or are they going to be more like, my husband and really like a pie chart or some kind of bar graph, right? Or both. So what are the visuals that you might incorporate into that one story that you want to tell? And then the last thing is what's the medium? Would you, if you put it in the CSBG report, that's great. But is there another thing that you could put in? Is there a website that you might be able to put it on? I think when I looked at Nancy and the school supplies, there was y'all had a Facebook group or something, or a Facebook page, and that's where I came up and saw the photographs. So, do you have a Facebook group or a Facebook page or something in your community where people go to, a bulletin board or, meetings where people attend, and you can hand out a 1-page flyer or something? Or you're trying to reach the youth in your community. So you're going on TikTok or Instagram or wherever. What if you're going to tell the story about whatever happened in that housing initiative? Where are you going to put it? Oh, Brenda, I love this. I provide graphic annual reports to our memberships. They love to have it all broken down. I share on our members only page on our website. So good, right? And that members only, that's your audience right there, your members. And you want to be able to tell members a certain story. You might want to tell the public a different story, right? Or a different part of the story. So really thinking about those things. So please, you don't have to, I'm not going to make anybody come off of and share a story if you don't want to, but take a minute here to pick something from your annual report and just write down audience is this group of people. Message, what I want the takeaway to be, this. The visual I think I need to have, this. The medium where I'm gonna share it, this. You take that time and you write that down. Eventually you'll be able to just build that into your process anytime you put these things together, right? Think about who you're going to tell the story to and what you're going to say and where you're going to say it and how. Go ahead, Brenda.
Yeah, I just also wanted to mention that it also gives you an opportunity to recruit those that might need the help.
Yeah.
Because the application is up there on the website. So it's also another opportunity to, for our members to apply for assistance also.
Absolutely. I think, I can connect this back to Monica and I were providing LIWAP support, right? And one of the big things that we focused on there was just letting people know, because it was a COVID program. So letting people know what they can use their funding for, right? Sometimes people just don't know, like, okay, so that's great that there's this program, there's CSBG funds, but I probably can't do anything with it. Right. But hearing a story or seeing a story of some kind or a visual that tells them, oh, you know what? Like, yeah, I guess that you can use those funds for this. And there's a program for me for this. I didn't realize that. Like you may or may not be surprised at how many people need that inspiration from a story that you tell. Right. To go, yeah, okay, like I guess I can be involved in this and this applies to me. Right. Again, back to that whole connecting with the heart, it's also connecting with like the people, because sometimes we don't see ourselves in the things that are all around us. We think it's not for us or doesn't include us, but it might. And it helps us to know that if we hear or see the stories. So it's really good. Awesome. All right. So let's see, I'm gonna keep going. How much time do I have here, Verna? We started a little bit late.
You
Or early.
have at least 15 more minutes if you need,
Great.
if you want to go through. Mhm.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you. Okay, just keeping the time check. All right, so the next thing is bringing data to life. Okay, so it means combining quantitative and qualitative elements. Okay, and for me as a data nerd, like this is it, right? Like I love talking about these things, but in very simple terms, it's the same thing we've been talking about, right? The quantitative elements are the numbers, the qualitative elements are the stories, right? So program metrics are the quantitative, the demographic information, the comparative statistics, all of that is the numbers, right? I want to see numbers. Qualitative elements are all of those testimonials and all of those elder stories and perspectives and all the knowledge and wisdom that you have and that you can add to the data that you have, observations that you make, the community context that you might get from others when you're providing, support. So, as an example, when you're combining these two elements, you're saying things like 80% of families accessed emergency food assistance during the winter months, right? So and then you've got a quote
this is an example, not from anybody real. But the quote is from a tribal elder who says, "The food program helped me feed my grandchildren during the hardest months. It wasn't just about the food, it was about preserving our dignity and traditions," right? I saw a bunch of that in the chat earlier in this presentation, right? You have those stories, those stories, and those are things that people, share with you. And like Minette said, you don't have to identify people by name whatsoever. And for their protection and yours, you shouldn't. But, saying a tribal elder said that, or saying that a teenager in your community said that, those things can be hugely powerful, right? So we're connecting the quantitative, the number of 80%, and the qualitative, that wisdom from someone who's like, yeah, okay, so because you helped all these families, this is really how it impacted us. All right. Okay, mapping your impact. Okay, I put this in here because it is so prevalent that we see maps being used for a lot of things, but I also know that there's a lot of sensitivities when it comes to mapping things and showing maps. As far as like our territories, our nations, where do we all belong? That's definitely can be a sticky point for a lot of people. However, I also think that maps, in the context of, showing impact can be really valuable, powerful tools, right? So it helps you, one, visualize the space that you're working in, your land, the place that you all reside, where your communities live. It can help you visualize things like when people are further out. Sorry, Jordan, I'm going to use you as an example, but Jordan telling me that he had to go, 3 hours away to go to a particular location that he needed to be at, right? That's powerful. That's impactful information. And see it on a map and understand, wow, visually, that's, in order for someone to get services, they've got to go a really far distance, right? But seeing that matters. And there are a lot of different tools that are out there that can help. This is not a tool, but this is just an example of what, something I wanted to share because it's kind of a heat map, nothing to do with CSBG, but this is specifically about food banks in a particular portion of California. And if you look at this graph, you can kind of show, it shows like where people who are living below a certain line, right? And who's very low to, very high. But even seeing something, geographically spread out using a map, using colors, can really tell a powerful story and can really highlight potentially places where more people need help, more people need access, where to concentrate your energy and efforts, right? And also to tell the story after you've done your work, right? You can say, oh, okay, like here's where we really helped people. But you know what? Next time we're going to need to help people in a different area because we learned this time that they weren't able to access certain things, right? So maps do help. And I do think that there are, I think this is, I have to move my screen just a second because my bar is covering it. But if y'all are familiar with ArcGIS, which I think many of you are, there are all kinds of different things that you can use, you can do with a tool like ArcGIS. These are just some examples. If you Google it, different story maps is what they're called. I actually think Monica and I helped create a story map a while back that showed all the different impacts that the OCS programs had on tribal communities. And it provided, kind of a geographical overlay of where everything is and which tribes were being served by different programs. But, it also allows you to tell, a lot different stories. Like, these are such beautiful, beautiful images. They're really impactful, highly impactful, easy to read and consume. Like I love looking at these photographs. But anyway, just an example of a certain kind of tool that can have a really significant visual impact, but also incorporate mapping and other things that might be useful to you telling your data story. Anyway, I just wanted to show that really quick. All right. So now that hopefully some of you took your report and you did that thing where I asked you to kind of look at those 4 pillars of the data storytelling, the audience, the message, the visual, and the medium. And one thing I'd like you to do is think about how you're going to tell your story differently now. Ooh, this is a good question for Minette maybe, or team. Will reports allow you to add types of images? Or somebody on the team? Can you upload images? Or is it something where you'd have to provide a link to something? Anybody on the federal team?
I'm listening for PDE to chime in on this one. Just
Wasn't sure if it had to be like in a special format or if even the reports allowed images.
Yeah, that's what I think. So Mitch said links could be put into the narrative boxes. So if you had like your information on a different on a web page or website, you could put a link into the narrative box. I think that's the best way to do it, just because of the limitations of the form itself.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think that's a cool idea too. Okay. Yeah, so so take the information that you put together about those, like you took that one data point and your or that one part of a story that you had from your annual report, and you've put them in the context of those pillars. Think now about how different that is going to look for you and how different the impact will be to see those few sentences that you wrote in the report turn into something that Brenda is obviously going to do, which I'd be happy to help her with. Have this visual that now corresponds with that data point, right? Or those series of data points. What do you think, just out of curiosity, anyone can speak up, like what kind of impact do you think that will have on people if they see your data point about housing initiatives and suddenly you've created something where you got pictures, you got some charts, you got like you're putting in a website or a report that's graphic and beautiful. Tell me how you think people will feel or think about your data once you do that.
I definitely think that we're much more like humans, like more imagery. Like they like graphics.
Yeah.
More visual.
Yeah. We live in a very visual era, right? And people are getting all kinds of information given to them at all times, and there's lots of things blinking everywhere. But people, I love this. Chriselle, this is perfect. People will be able to relate to what is displayed, right? Because people relate to people, right? We don't relate to data. We relate to people. And Tammy really emphasized that well earlier, right? We all are connecting with the people. So the more people we see in the story we tell, the more likely it is that we're going to connect with it and we're going to understand it. And I think that that's really powerful. And I think that that's really part of a lot of our traditions and just been something that we've done for a long time. But I think sometimes we disconnect that from having to do, sort of managerial type admin work. But they're very connected. And I hope that this is encouraging y'all to think about them as being connected. Okay, great. Melanie said, images and graphics can be uploaded or attached along with the annual report. Yes, and I love that, Verna. It gives the appearance of more credibility. Visuals help people truly see impact. So true. All right. So, I mean, even in this, like this, just what's on the screen before, like I hate spreadsheets. People I work with love them, and that's why we work together, because they're the spreadsheet people. I am not. But I love what's in the spreadsheets, and I love what I can get out of spreadsheets to turn it into something more that looks like the after, right? It's got a human in it. It's got other illustrations in it. I love that stuff. That's very for me, right? So anyway, I just want to emphasize that you can do so much. Yes, our elders understand visual better than us speaking. So good. All right. So I'm going to go back to tools and templates. So yesterday I talked about a couple of different tools. I'm going to go back and show a little bit of another thing. So this is just building off of, if you remember yesterday, I shared Canva and how I took some data points from the report that Minette actually showed today. And I asked it to create, kind of a community impact report. So, and it did, and it gave me some beautiful templates that I could use that had the numbers in it that I could definitely, customize very quickly and turn into something visual and nice. But then I asked it, turn the data in the report I uploaded into an infographic that I can share on social media. This is just an example. So it said, okay, yeah, give me a minute. And then it made all these really cool other graphics for me to use, right? So if I wanted to put something on my Facebook or our tribe's Facebook page or whatever, I could grab one of these really easily, customize it, make it cool, and put it out there really fast. So simple and very easy to edit. It's just as easy to edit as a Word document or a PowerPoint, right? But again, just an example of one of the things Canva can do. And I will also say, because I think this is a neat feature of Canva as well, is that you can, with your same Canva subscription, you can make websites for a variety of things, as long as you have like a URL of some kind. And actually, you don't even need your own URL if you don't want to. It'll give you one. But if you want to create a really quick web page, like let's say you're having an event and you want to make a web page about it, or to go back in the context of this, you have a story to tell about an impact that was created by what you did with CSBG, you can actually just go into Canva and use any template that they have, customize it, and make a whole website that people can just go to, and you can just put it in your emails and say, yeah, you want to hear the story about XYZ, check it out. Here's a link, and people can go to it. It doesn't cost you anything extra. And again, it's just as simple as creating a PowerPoint. So I love Canva, if you can't tell already. I just think it has a lot of utility to it. And again, like if you're talking about people needing to see more visuals, this is just a great tool to allow you to build those visuals. And then the last tool that I'll show you, okay, this is kind of crazy. So I'm still getting over this myself. But this is a tool called Notebook LM. So if you are a Google user, if you have Google or G Suite, and that's what your organization uses to send emails and create documents, etc. I think it's an add-on for some accounts, but you can get this thing called Notebook LM. It's an AI tool. But one of the things that it does that absolutely blew my mind is that it can create video and audio for you in less than 10 minutes on things that you have created, in less than 5 minutes sometimes, on things that you have already created to help build awareness and understanding. So as an example, I uploaded the sample report that Minette went over today into this tool, into the notebook, and I asked it to provide an audio overview. So I'm going to play a little bit of that. And keep in mind that what I play, I did not do anything other than give it the report and say, make an audio of it. And it decided how it was going to, and I could train it a little bit more. I could be more specific to say, hey, talk about these points in the report if I wanted to, but I didn't give it anything at all. And this is sort of what it provided to us. Wonder if it's going to play. Can you hear that audio? I can't hear audio.
We
Can y'all
cannot hear the audio. We cannot
Okay,
hear
hold
the
on.
audio.
Let me mute my audio first.
Nancy, Sorry, Jamie, you have to go back to share and then make sure that when you hit share your screen, you also hit share audio, I think.
I did that. I'm gonna try to do it again really quick because I think it's worth it if we can get to share this. Okay, I'm gonna share that screen, and oh, actually, sorry. Share sound. Okay. But I actually see that the sound is playing, but I'm not hearing it either. It might be that I don't have it pulled up properly. Let's see. Give it a minute here. You might not like me.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine trying to trace the journey of a federal dollar, from Washington, D.C. all the way to a tribal community, thinking about how it impacts real lives. Sounds like a pretty complex blueprint, right? Well, today, we're kind of unlocking that detailed plan.
Exactly. Today's deep dive, it really centers on parts of the FY24 CSBG Tribal Annual Report. And this is a crucial document. It doesn't just outline how tribal organizations manage funds from the Community Services Block Grant, or CSBG. It also demands a really granular account of their work.
Right. So our mission today, it isn't just to skim the official language.
So those voices that you heard, completely made up by the computer. And if you notice, they sound like real people talking, which is actually terrifying to me. But what it can do for you is if you have people, I love podcasts, for example. I love hearing audio. I love having audio of things. And if you don't want to put people's real voices, or you don't have time to sit down and record a podcast, what you can do is have a written summary of something, load it up into this tool, and then the tool will automatically, if by your asking, create an audio overview of it. That's basically two people talking and summarizing what you wrote about. Really helpful for auditory learners. Really helpful for just, having a different way to present your data story, and hearing a different. And, I actually learned about this tool because my husband's coworkers, way younger coworkers, they were trying to learn about a particular topic that they didn't know much about. And so they used this particular tool to learn more about that topic, but they were all wanting to hear the audio summary of it as opposed to just reading through it. I thought that was fascinating. These are people in their early 20s. But here's again another tool that you can utilize to build these assets that can be helpful to people who learn in different ways, but still capture your stories. I won't go too much into it, but there is this, it made a video as well on all of this, which I found fascinating. I won't play it, but what I found interesting about this is that they called this annual report the 1800-hour form. And I think they got that information from something that the federal government provides, but basically talks about how it really takes 1800 hours of your labor to fill in these reports, right? And to do the work. And it's not filling in the report. What they actually mean by the 1800 hours is how much time you spent having these events, collecting information, talking to people, telling stories. It takes a lot. Right. Go ahead, Verna.
I don't want to do this, but I just wanted to make sure you. Yeah.
I have to stop. Sorry.
I want to give you a cushion because I know I won't need all of the time this afternoon, but I did want to make sure you are aware of the time.
Yes, I will wrap up. I'm at the end, nearing the end here. But yes, I just wanted to show how that tool can definitely expand all the things that you're working on and just increase your toolkit. So something to think about. So let's wrap this up. Main takeaways from what I talked about today is lead with audience and message. Pair numbers with human voices, even though I just played you some AI-made human voices. I really mean the voices of the people in your community and the impacts that your work and CSBG has had in their lives. Using visuals for clarity and embedding storytelling in your workflow. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but build it in, right? Telling stories, don't wait till the very end to capture the stories. capture the stories right then, have a coffee with someone, sit down, make it a point after every event to have like in Hawaii, we call it a talk story, right? We all get together, we talk story, we eat food usually, and we gather the story about what happened here and what makes an impact. So speaking of story, we're going to get into it where you're actually going to participate in small groups in activity with Monica. But the big thing to start with, so again, please bring out your annual reports if possible, because you're going to need them, is what is one highlight from your last report that might help to bring your community story to life? So as we transition, I just want you to think about what's one story that you could be able to tell from your report that really is going to bring your community to life for us, for other people in your community. Think about what one thing you might be able to focus on, and Monica is going to help us go through all that together. So thanks for listening, and we'll move on. Thanks, Verna.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Let us show Jamie some appreciation. We breathed in appreciation today, and this session again was one of high quality, and we appreciate all of the information that you have shared with us, Jamie, and how you set us up for the next session that is about to get underway, and I'm excited for our attendees to also be able to go in groups and talk about some of this information. So you all join me in welcoming Monica, who is going to lead us through some story circles and how we can share some successes through stories. So Monica, turning it over to you.
Thank you, Verna. First, I want to start with apologies for the technical difficulties for the resource navigator earlier. Hopefully when we share all the materials, we will send out a PDF of that so you can have quick access to some of those links that are important for you to have. Secondly, how can I top Jamie's? But the good thing is mine is not a full presentation. Wasn't that such an amazing and informative presentation by our very own Dr. Muskoff? So thank you, Jamie, for that insight. And I'm going to carry on what she started. So if you didn't meet me yesterday and I saw some familiar faces, hi, Tammy, good to see you and hear your voice. My name is Monica Toya. I am the Senior TTA Program Analyst with the Lux Tribal Training and Technical Assistance Team. I have over 15 years experience administering tribal programs, local, state, and federal grant programs. So but with no further ado, if we could go to the next slide, I just want to continue what we've started in terms of telling your story. So in this session, what we're going to cover is obviously sharing your story. We want the stories to be grounded in Indigenous storytelling and traditions and collective wisdom. So this is a participatory session using story circles to share your experiences amongst each other. And we want you to reflect on the successes, the challenges, and the traditional values that you utilize in your service delivery. Please, like Jamie said, highlight community strengths and traditions that you utilize in your CSBG initiatives. And we want you to identify and use your annual report data for your storytelling. This fosters peer learning and helps you connect examples. So next slide. First, I want to start out by saying numbers measure progress, stories bring it to life, right? Everyone has a story. We all can, like Jamie said earlier, we all can plug in numbers into this spreadsheet. We all can provide that spreadsheet as a report, but there's a story behind that. And this is what we want to share today. And this is what we want to emphasize today. Next slide. So I just want to say that we're going to utilize the annual report. And I just want to emphasize the purpose of the annual report a little bit before we go on. So number one, it demonstrates program impact. This is where you get to tell anybody that's reading your report how your program impacts your community and the service provision, how all that impacts your community in all the different ways. It highlights your tribal innovation and stewardship, right? We mentioned, or we talked about stewardship yesterday, and the fact that we are stewards of our programs and the funds that are entrusted to us to utilize to help, run these programs or provide these services. And it informs federal and community stakeholders. This is where we get to tell, like I said, when you tell your story and all the numbers have a story, we inform anybody that's reading the report, including local leadership or even local community members and the federal team, what you're actually doing with the dollars provided to you in your community. And it serves as a foundation for future funding and advocacy. As was mentioned earlier, I believe even in Minette's report, the National Report to Congress, all the numbers that you provide is combined in a report to Congress that lets Congress know these are the numbers. This is what the communities are doing. When you put the story to the numbers, it adds another layer, because we all know our congressional leadership is not always on the ground to see the everyday happenings of our programs. But when we provide this information in the report, when it makes it into the national report, they can see what you're doing on the ground and how the funding that they're approving and providing is making an impact in their communities. So that's the purpose of the annual report. Next slide, please. So turning data into stories. So what information do you give in your report, right? You want to reflect on your strengths, highlight the voices of those that you serve, right? Share your impact stories or quotes. Those quotes are very effective. 1 word, 2 words of the things that the clients that you serve that they shared. I know I read some in the comments earlier, about the difference that your programs are making in their everyday lives. Share those with us, because those are moving. Like we said earlier, humans connect to humans. And when you hear that, I think a lot of us, and I was thinking about this even during Jamie's presentation, that we're in the field of work that we're in because of the compassion that we have. Right? We have a compassion for the people, for the community. And so once we realize, well, we know that. So I feel like once someone else reads that quote, it helps them to connect with the individual to say, okay, this really made an impact in this person's life. And then, like we mentioned before, incorporate approaches such as traditional storytelling. I believe in Indigenous communities, that's what we're good at. We're always good at telling a story. So tell your story in your report. So what kind of data is being provided in the annual report? You want to focus on community impact, right? Consider qualitative data. Sure, we want a written narrative, and we've seen some of the examples that were provided, some very short, some very thorough. But we all saw that when quantitative data, the numbers were inputted, that actually made a difference as well. Incorporate progress metrics, right? Dr. Muskov just shared the spreadsheet as a before and then the after, where it shows, actual tables of the progress that has been made. Incorporate those visual elements into your reporting, and that can help people clearly see what it is that you're doing or the progress that you're making. So that, and then, so what do your responses tell about the stories that are provided? So connect to tribal priorities and values, right? Are you bringing your data and your community story to life? When you provide this data, qualitative, quantitative, progress metrics, when you provide that in your annual report, are you really telling the full story of your tribe? Are you really telling what services you're providing to your community in a way that we can actually visualize and see, right? Just like almost like reading a good book. When you're reading a good book and the author's narrating, or you're listening to a good book, even an audio book, you're visualizing the story as they're telling it because they're providing that context. same concept here, right? You want whoever's reading your story, your report, to be able to visualize what you're saying and understand what you're saying. And then, is there anything you could enhance? So think about that as we're going into the activity. And I hope that you all have a copy of your latest report that you submitted. And we all think about the sections that, oh, I could have done this better. Now that we've been given all the examples in Manette's presentation and then in Jamie's presentation, think about what is it that you provided in your report and what is it that you could enhance and make better. So, and then lastly, I know we don't always like to talk about expenditures, but we always want to emphasize, right, that your expenditures align with their services provided. So if you provided youth services, we want to make sure that the expenditures provided in your report reflect that you actually spent funding on youth services. So I just want to throw that little bit of tidbit in there. Next slide, please. So what are the elements of a strong success story? So we clearly, when you went after the CSBG funding, you probably or should have done a needs assessment, and you've analyzed what the needs assessment said about the needs in your community. You've identified the gaps in your community, and now you've submitted the tribal plan that states the services that you're going to provide to be able to provide those gaps or services in the where there's gaps. So we want you to be able to, you know, say, okay, this is a need. So the challenge or the need has to be identified. And then what service or programming are you going to provide that addresses those specific needs? And then after you provide those services, what were the outcomes that were achieved? What were you able to do? And this is where all the data comes in, right? We saw Dr. Muscott's pyramid. So we want to think about that and be able to tell the story in a way that makes sense. And then, like I said, add voices from your client base, a personal or community story, and how the services that you provided made an impact to individuals or groups of individuals. And then how it aligns with the CSBG goal and tribal stewardship, right? Because we all know, as I mentioned before, we are accountable in all different aspects to the community and to various stakeholders, to the community, to leadership, to the funding agency. So make sure all that aligns. So when you're doing this reporting, you know, we want to be able to understand what challenge or need did you identify? What program or service did you provide to address those needs? What was the outcome that you achieved? Do you have a personal story that will enhance that? And then how does it align with the CSBG goals? So we're going to go on to the actual activity. So this is really more about you all connecting with one another and sharing your stories. You know, this is where we want you to use the annual report as your foundation to share your story. Next slide, please. So we're going to have a breakout activity, right? So what we would like, so we had the example that Manette shared earlier, but also we have, if you were able to bring your own report, we would like you to just take a look at your report. And if you don't have your report, we have that report that Manette provided earlier, and then look at the two responses. So in comparison, we reviewed one report that had more thorough information, and then we reviewed one that could use a little bit more information. And think about which response was more impactful and why. And then, you know, how could you benefit from looking deeper into your own data? And then what impacts would expanding your story have on the community? You know, like I mentioned before, the stories that you tell is carried on, right? And then when we show that this you know, this funding is making this impact on this particular community, and then we present that at the congressional level, they'll actually see, okay, this is how they're utilizing the money. It is necessary. This is the impact that they're making. And as a collective whole, it's making a significant impact in our communities. So in the breakout, look at your own annual report for similar entries. Don't be shy. We're all here to learn. And ask those same questions to yourself and share with your peers, what it is that you could enhance within your report. So with that said, you will have 10 minutes to review your reports. And if you don't have a report, please feel free to review the report that Manette provided. And I believe there is a link in the chat. And have a discussion. When we come back from the 10 minutes, you can please choose someone from your group to come back and report. Give us a brief report on what it is that you discussed and what it is that you believe you can do better. Thank you, Manette, for linking that again. So Mitch, if we could go ahead and put the group in a breakout, that'll be great. And I look forward to hearing all that you guys share.
Oh, Brenda was sharing how she utilizes visuals to provide an update to her on what CSBG is doing in her community already. So she already uses a lot of visuals and numbers to do that.
Okay, so before, I like that you're already sharing, but do you want to just go ahead and share what group you were in so we can just start that process? Because right now we hopefully all chose someone from your group to represent, and to report back what your group discussed.
Monica, Brenda. Fortunately, for some reason, due to permissions or something, I couldn't actually go into a chat room. So Jessica and Jordan stayed with me while everybody else went to a chat, and then Verna was in and out. So.
Oh, you weren't able to go into.
Right.
Okay. Well, I think it sounds like you had a pretty engaging conversation anyway, and I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. So Jessica, you were saying what you discussed?
Yeah, Brenda was sharing like what types of
Okay.
information she shares. She doesn't necessarily use stories because it's a little bit of a different report than a highlight report, but just sharing some of the numbers that she includes when she's making her visual reports for folks. So.
Okay, awesome. We have about 5 more minutes. I was in group 2. We selected Kaylee to let you all know what we discussed. Kaylee, if you want to come on, unmute yourself and then share with the group what the discussion that took place in our group, that'll be great.
Yeah. So our group discussed a lot about the adding more context to some of the information. So for example, even just adding more information about like the structure of the department or the organization, that might be helpful in kind of giving information about the services that are provided. And then also providing context for some general statements you might include. So if you talked about, that people in the program thought it was useful, maybe identify, how you determined people thought it was useful. Like, did you do any evaluations or assessments, just to provide, some better explanation or data on what you're reporting.
Thank you. And then room 3.
Come in. Are you done or are you still working?
Oh, wait. Oh, Nikki, you're in room 1. Do you want to share what was discussed in room 1? Oh, okay.
Monica, I don't know what
Okay.
room I was in.
I was putting the chat information in the Verna wanted me to.
Okay.
I can report out, but we had actual tribal members if they want to elaborate on what they put in the chat. It's fascinating how services are used and how a couple of tribes use services like food. And I did like the leveraging and collaboration with tribal leaders. In one of the tribes, they have actual people that's growing food and donating to their food pantries and providing like eggs to service the community to decrease the burden on families in the community. So I thought that was very, very interesting.
That is, it's excellent. Thank you. Room 3, do you want to share what you all discussed? So whoever was with Dr. Muskoff, it sounds like you all were in room 3. Anybody?
Hi,
It's
my name is Bonnie. I was in group 3. Some stuff that we talked about really quickly was again, just kind of like what everybody said, listing as much information as possible as what we for which services we're providing. For example, if it was like housing services and rental assistance was one that we were doing. Then we would just make sure that we're very descriptive, maybe do a testimonial or something kind of showing the impact and the longevity of that funding. Also, we talked about some of the other people in the group had pulled up their annual report or their reporting for this, and we kind of were able to break down some of the things that we thought were great or needed some improvement on. And I think honestly, it's just kind of like what everybody else has said to this point, just sharing as much as possible to really show the impact to our community and our members that we're serving. And if anybody else wanted to add anything, I'm sorry, I just kind of stepped up there quickly.
That's good. Thank you for stepping in.
No, for sure. We got cut off. We were in a real good kind of conversation going there, so we never really appointed anybody. But thank you.
Thanks for sharing. And then I know that Jamie said Roberta had good insight, but I just also want to make sure I give the other 2 groups an opportunity. We have about a minute left before we move on to the next session. Does anybody from group 4 have anything that you would like to share with us?
I was in group 4, and I would just say, Karen, if you're still on the line, had some good insights if she would be able to share really quickly. Otherwise, I'm happy to report out.
You can report out.
Thanks, Karen. So we talked about a little bit at the end about outputs versus outcomes. And one of the things Karen shared was, talking about helping members who needed help applying for like state benefits and assistance and helping them fill out all that paperwork. And so Lena and I were saying, it's also good to connect the dots to like, okay, so they were able to get those benefits successfully. Then, what did that free up in their lives? How did that make things better and move towards self-sufficiency? And I think that was a strong example of like, they received CSBG services, and then so maybe they were able to free up income for medicine or school supplies or other benefits in their lives, even just food, frankly. So that was something that could really be telling a strong story.
Thank you. That is amazing. It's almost the same, like I mentioned before. Sometimes people just need a hand up, right? That they're not necessarily asking for a hand out. They just need some guidance, some help with and some direction. So thank you for providing that. That's amazing. Group 4 or group 5. Anybody?
So we had some technical issues with sound. I'll go ahead and jump in, but I'll attribute a lot of the feedback to Maria. So one was that the quotes are always a nice touch because it connects with the reality of people. And something else that was amplified is that when talking about partnering with other agencies, including like how CSBG is included in that. Like, what does it fund? And being very explicit about said partnership. And then, as we had some audio issues with the screen share, we actually jumped really quickly to housing, and hearing a personal story of what it means to one family would have been inclusive. And then right before we got brought into the other room, I decided, I was like, okay, well, why don't we try to leverage something that got brought up? So this, I plugged it into Copilot, and of course, there's a ton of typos and some characters you can't represent or interpret. But just taking the narrative from the employment section, Copilot spit this out in less than 30 seconds. So with a little bit of refinement and telling it exactly what you needed, we were able to get like a visual infographic that could be used later. So that's it for group 5. And I'll see if any of my group members had anything they wanted to include or add.
No, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
All
Yeah,
credit goes to them and Maria, because she gave us a lot of good nuggets.
That I love that. I love that you all were able to incorporate what you learned and to try to make use of it like as an example. I love that you all did that. I will just quickly go through in the chat. Some people said they could definitely add a little bit more to their narrative and give actual stories. And they did more detail or testimonials to their reporting. And then I also saw where one group said that it might be helpful to write the narrative as if the person reading it, your target audience, has no idea what you're talking about, right? Because I think which is a very valid, because I think a lot of times we're so immersed in the work that we do as tribal program administrators that we just think everybody knows or understands the work that we're doing, and the way that it's written is written as such, right? But when you write it in a way where as if they have no clue, right? Where they have no clue about what you're doing and the services that you're providing in the day-to-day, then it's getting written in a whole new perspective. So I love that. So also asking a lot of questions. But yeah, and then so with that being said, we are a few minutes over time. Thank you for sharing some amazing nuggets, even in the chat. Thank you for sharing what you all discussed. I know that time seemed a little bit short, but I'm glad you were able to connect and share with each other your success stories and things that you could do better. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Verna, or if we want to turn it directly over to Dr. Muskoff for the next presentation.
Yes, I think we'll turn it right over since we are coming up on ending our day. So, Jamie, if you're ready, we can let you keep going.
I am, and I'm gonna end on time, Verna, so that you can start on time and then we can end on time. Okay. Okay, so great. It's my job to now take everything that we've talked about, because we've talked a lot about a lot of things in the last couple of days. And Verna is going to put together the final bow, but I think this is more a wrap up on all the things that we've talked about with regard to data storytelling and how we use the data in our CSBG report and build on it and tell impactful stories. So I'm going to try to not sound like I'm rushing through it, but I absolutely want to, commend everybody for sticking through it. If it's a new topic to you, or if you're new to CSBG especially, I think, there's a lot of information coming at everybody, but what I hope that you are taking away from all of this discussion about data and storytelling is really the most important thing, which is, data is not just for compliance. It's a tool for sovereignty. It's a tool for advocacy, and it's a tool that we can use, to make meaningful change and to help other people help us make meaningful change as well. And that really is, the big thing about, how learning how to tell stories from data is really great. So, why does it matter? It absolutely, builds on this foundation of, what we already know, right? That it's important. We all know that it's important to report our data. We all know that it's something that we have to do.
It's a requirement. But what I hope that you got out of this was that you don't have to just make a requirement, be focused on the managerial aspects. Like yesterday, Monica talked about stewardship and how that's so built into everything that we do, right? So what I hope is that as we've gone through these things, your idea about reporting and data has sort of transformed into something that's more about, knowing that it's a tool to do great things, not just for reporting in this context, but to do things in your own community, because your stories are yours. And I can't stress enough, this idea that, data can be misconstrued. And the more you're able to put narrative to your data, the more control you have over the story that's being told about you. And I think that that's really important. All right. So another thing to focus on is, when tribes own and control their data, they strengthen governance, align programs with values, and control their narrative. And community narrative control means that your data reflects your story. And, I tell my students often that data is just that, it's data. It's open to interpretation. For example, if the data point is 5 people attended our community garden event, that might seem like a low number if you just put that out there. 5 people attended our community garden event. That's not a lot of people, right? But if you add context into that data, in a narrative that expands on it and turns it into information, it can tell another story. Like 5 out of 8 invited guests attended our community garden event. And if I add experience and perhaps more context to this information, it becomes knowledge, right? So 5 out of 8 invited community educators came to our event. And as a result, they'll be able to teach our high school students about what they learned and bring multiple student groups to the garden, expanding our reach by more than 100 community members who will be able to use this garden. And if we add judgment and community understanding to this knowledge, we get wisdom. And that wisdom from this is inviting educators to our programs so that they can teach others multiplies our ability to outreach and give opportunities to our youth to connect to community practices like growing and sharing our own food. So that was, if you couldn't tell, that was the data pyramid, right, that we talked about. That is how we work from a basic data point all the way up to something that's really powerful, really insightful, and really tells the fuller story. And when we submit data without that story, we allow others that opportunity to interpret it, and interpret data as they see fit, right? So it's very easy. It would have been very easy to say, oh, 5 people, they only got 5 people to come. But those 5 people are a force multiplier, right? So, think about that. And so, with this, as you're writing things down for yourself, one thing I'd love for you to write for yourself is, what community story, doesn't have to be CSBG, but is there a community story that you wish your data could better highlight, right? So if there's something that, a story you really want to tell that's impactful, that you're trying to, influence people, like what data might you need to have in order to sort of support that, back that up? I would just take some time to write that down a bit. And, in order to kind of wrap all of this up and talk about sort of how to do this effectively and how to make it not take too much of your time, I'm going to give you a few different steps to walk through in order to take what you learned today and what you already know and add richness to your stories without creating additional burden on you administratively. So here's the 6 steps to applying what we learned today. First step is moving from CSBG compliance to value-driven storytelling. This is huge. So just the mindset of, reframing the required elements, employment, housing, education, reframing those data points into fuller stories of resilience and cultural strength. Numbers become evidence of intergenerational healing and well-being, for example, and that's a story worth telling, right? So moving out of the compliance mindset and expanding it, not moving away from it, but expanding from compliance into value-driven data storytelling is a powerful way to start this process, and have a strategy for it, have a reframing.
a way that you can reframe the data that you have and the stories you have into something bigger and more impactful. Okay, the second step is using data for continuous community learning. So it's not just a you job, is what I would say. Hold community data summits, share infographics, invite community to come tell stories, and pair that with traditional knowledge and traditional ways of delivering knowledge, right? Data becomes a living conversation if you do this. So, having, community members participate in data storytelling, having, it be accessible to people and people knowing, hey, where, I know you guys do something with CSBG and we went to this thing and I get it, but where do I find out more about that? Right? Sharing openly with the community. Oh, we have these videos, we have these reports. We'd love for you to see what's going on. Okay. Story integration, inviting the community stories, to explain trends. This is one thing I wanted to mention when Monica was talking too, is one thing that's really powerful and that we can't do, but only you and people in your community can do is, draw correlations between one data point and another. We can make assumptions, but if you and your stories are able to say, okay, because we did this, because we, provided children with better school supplies or school supplies at all, we have a higher attendance rate in schools. We have, fewer children who are, not going to the next grade. I mean, there's so many correlations that you can draw within your own data based on behavior and patterns that you see in your own community. I think that, understanding that need to integrate, and a few people talked about that whole services thing, that, that idea of wraparound services. There are stories that you can tell that relate different data points and really have an impact in many different ways. And never be afraid to really, lean into your own traditional ways of sharing knowledge in your community. I think that that's really important, something we should all preserve, and it's something that we can all share with others and other people who are our peers, who are, just wanting to learn more about us and what we do. Okay. Step number 3 is designing solutions and setting priorities. So it seems like a lot, right? We went through a lot of different tools. We went through a lot of different things that you could do. But, in order to really do it and do it effectively, you've got to put a little bit of time and thought into what are the things we're going to do. Create a system of some sort, create a process of some sort that you can go through that will help every time, that will help you reduce the amount of time it takes for you to collect the information that you need, the data that you need in order to tell the stories you want to tell. So if that means, okay, every time we have an event, I have a checklist, for example, of all things I want to get. And I'm sure you already do, right? You probably do this already. But, if we host an event, here's the checklist of all the information that we'd like to gather. Here's the thing that we, I need to record a story or get a quote from somebody about what their experience was, right? If you have that set aside every time, that's you designing the process for yourself so that it's not something new every time. And it's easy to do. It's just a short list. Here are the things I want to do every time we have an event or something happens that I want to capture. And then also, setting a priority, right? So you don't have to tell a data story about every single data point that you have. What I would recommend is that you really focus on, okay, maybe this year for CSBG, what we're really focused on in our community is housing right now. And that's the big story that we want to tell. It doesn't mean that you don't tell the big story or good stories about other initiatives, but maybe that's the focus of your whole year, right? More than anything else. And so, rather than just only writing about housing and having that checklist for all those housing related things, what you might want to spend additional time doing is thinking about how providing housing related services is impacting the other dimensions of what you're receiving CSBG funding for, right? So it's kind of like that example that we got earlier, I think from Tammy, about, putting it in a container, right? And it's an initiative. That initiative can cover multiple areas that you're getting funding for, right? But the initiative might be housing. All right. Sorry, I'm going through these quickly. Step 4 is data storytelling for advocacy, funding, and partnership. Can't stress this enough, right? Like, don't just think about it as, we need to tell a story so that we can put it in a report. It's also telling stories that allow people to be advocates for you, better advocates for you, and for you to be a better advocate for yourself about what you need and what your community needs and how you need it. So, don't forget that when you're putting together this, this data and you're pairing it with these lived experiences, one way that is probably a way that we're all familiar with that's really easy to talk through is kind of the before and after change, right? And so this is what things looked like before we implemented this or before we had this event. This is what things look like afterwards. And the afterwards doesn't have to be immediately afterwards. It could be on a time scale, right? 3 months after we had this event, this is what happened. 6 months, a year. But seeing, documenting transformation throughout a time period also can be really helpful, especially when you're doing an annual report like the CSBG annual report. Let's see. Go through. All right, step 5 is building community data capacity and systems. So I talked a little bit about this before, but I think this is important to put together, right? Having accessible tools for the community to use, having some kind of dashboard or a website or a Facebook page, like we talked about before, something that allows people in the community to see what you're doing, see what numbers you're collecting, see how many people came to things, see pictures of, people coming to events, right? You're in that way. I mean, it doesn't seem like it at first. It just seems like maybe you're just putting together some really cool social media posts, but in actuality, you really are putting together, using that as a data tool that's really easy to use, accessible, but it's giving everybody the opportunity to see your story in a visual manner and to, kind of make everybody feel like they're a part of the story as well. So, involving the tribe, involving other people in data collection as well. It helps in building trust so that people don't think that you're the only one telling their story, right? I think this is the sticking point for many of us. We don't want everybody, somebody telling our story for us. We want to be able to be a part of that narrative and telling our story. So the people you serve, have them be a part of their own narrative. I think that's so powerful. So really quick, before I go on, one thing I'd want to stop and pause to think about is, based on all the things that you learned about, well, since we've been here, what's one maybe low cost or free tool that your community could use to track or share data? I mentioned a couple. It might be just, it might be a Facebook page. It might be a website. It might be something on a community board. But what is one tool, doesn't have to be tech, that you could use to track or share data? It might be a podcast, right? It might be something, a monthly event that you host where people come and, learn like what's been happening in the community, or maybe one already exists. Right. So thinking about that, how do you build community data capacity? I think that that's a really great exercise to do. So if you've got your notebooks, your notes, we'd love for you to think about that. But if you want to share any of that in the chat, please do as we go along. But I'm going to keep going because I definitely want there to be time for us to hear from Verna and also to just kind of talk at the end. All right, and step number 6 is communalizing data use. Okay, so establishing these sort of routine reviews. So the way that I would like to frame this is you do an annual report, right, for CSBG. You also do, regular reporting and capturing what you're doing. Why not make that, kind of a community event as well? Invite people back, who were attending or benefiting from the programs that they were a part of. You know, not only does that allow you to get information and kind of like check in on where you're at with where, you know, where your data is and what your stories are, but it gives them the opportunity to hear what you're saying so far. You know and I love that idea because I think people want to, know like, how am I being represented as well? So that's one thing. I am a big proponent of peer exchange networks. So, being able to talk to other people who do what you do is tremendous. In my work, I call those things communities of practice, right? Where it's usually people who do the same thing getting together. And today and yesterday, you've had a whole bunch of people around you who do the job that you do in different places for different communities, right? And I know sometimes it can be complex to network with those folks, but it can be really, really beneficial. I love that today in our breakout, for example, Bonnie had talked about how she's new, but she already was like thinking about what can I do and hearing from other people and what their challenges were, and then how they were doing things and how they thought about doing things differently. That was really helpful. So, create a peer exchange network. It doesn't have to be facilitated through us in any way, but it definitely can help and benefit you as you're working through, your own data, and then document and integrate. I can't even tell you how important that is, right? And it's one of the most tedious and things to do. But capturing lessons learned from things. This is also a nerd thing that I am really big into. Even in my company, every time we do something that's significant, that takes a lot of people's effort, we always have a kind of a lessons learned get together of, okay, what went well, what didn't go so well, what things are happening here that we don't know about, what's the concern of yours, right? Having those kinds of mechanisms for you to get feedback from each other and to document what's been going on, whether it's through interviews you've done or programs that you've run, capturing those best practices and the feedback that you've got, that's also highly valuable, because that's one of the things that we hope to get out of your reporting data, I think, is hearing those best practices. What are the things that really consistently worked for you, that made it easy for you to administer your funds, that made it really highly impactful in the community when you did this kind of event? So yeah, document all that stuff and do it in real time as much as you can, because it's really hard to go back, because I know I forget a lot of things. All right, so those were your six steps in trying to take action on the things that we talked about since we've been here. Just getting other people involved and having more people, kind of see what you're doing when it comes to putting together the stories about your data. So, big thing I would love you to do, we don't have time to do it all today, but please take this away as an action of some sort. So if you can, write it down, or you can look at the slides later. But here's what would be great is, can you draft your community's vision and data story? Can you integrate a vision that your community already has, maybe, or maybe if you don't have one, can you put together kind of, what do you see? What kind of community do you envision, right? Like going all the way back to what Verna's visualization exercise was. What is the thing that you really want to be able to create? Is it comfort for people? Is it, eradicating poverty? Is it, making sure that children and elders are well taken care of? Whatever that vision is, write it down, right? And then frame the community issues or that are, holding you back from achieving that vision. And then, connect what you're doing to what it is that you're trying to accomplish overall, right? So, because I honestly think that you'll be way more compelled to write good data stories or to capture more data stories when you are regularly able, and I know you are, because I just hearing your stories, I know every day you're connecting what you're doing to the real lives of people But if you also connect it to this, the vision for your community, I think it will make it, one, more powerful, and two, it will remind you to capture those details that you think, are really going to help you achieve that vision. And then the last thing is, share your data stories, get peer feedback, right? I love that in the breakout, we're talking about, okay, here was what was in my report. And then, it was, okay,